LoveLore Library. Chapter 158. Meg's body froze. He didn't expect the system to suddenly issue a new mission, and the new mission was to limit the purchase of tofu pudding. Wasn't this system crazy about money? The system would receive 40 copper coins for each serving of tofu pudding sold. Logically speaking, it should be urging him to sell more tofu pudding, right? System, the restaurant has been open for so long. It's not good to limit the purchase of tofu pudding now, right? If the customers aren't satisfied with the food, then it's not good for the restaurant's reputation. Being able to eat your fill is now a specialty of the restaurant. Meg frowned. After thinking for a moment, he asked curiously, also, what the hell is that God of Cookery Promotion Lottery? The God of Cookery Promotion Lottery is a system that the system came up with after careful consideration to increase the host's enthusiasm for the promotion. It can also be called the God of Cookery's Wheel. After the host completes the designated mission, there is a chance to draw the method of making exquisite pastries, making ice cream, brewing high-end drinks, physical strength points, and other prizes. The prizes are generous, and it's guaranteed that you'll win. The system said excitedly. Ice cream. High-end drinks. Physical strength points. Meg's eyes slowly lit up. Amy would definitely like ice cream. Not many children could resist such a taste. As for the high-end drinks, he was a little tempted. Although he wasn't addicted to alcohol, drinking a glass of red wine before bed was quite a leisurely life. Of course, what made him most excited was that the system had finally added a physical strength point to the mission reward. In a few days, he would be able to accumulate 10,000 points and buy the first set of physical strength points. This was a crucial step for him to restore his physical strength to a normal person's physique. If he could obtain 0.5 physical strength from this mission, then he would enter a whole new level. He would be able to pick up a sword, and with the sword techniques and skills in his mind, he would be able to protect himself a little. The reward is barely enough. Meg's face was calm. He changed the topic and said, but system, let's talk about the purchase limit first. Why don't we change the mission? For example, selling 1,000 servings of tofu pudding or something. As a supervisor, this system has the obligation to remind the host when he walks into the wrong direction. The system will not interfere with the first 2 dishes, but it will promote a virtuous cycle for the restaurant by limiting the purchase of certain items. Let more customers taste the delicacies and return with enjoyment instead of waiting in line for a long time and seeing others return with 3 to 5 servings in their hands. This will hurt the customers even more. It added, the restaurant's popularity has spread to a certain extent. The quantity task will not be released in the short term. Hearing that, Meg fell into silence. He had actually discovered the problem mentioned by the system in the past 2 days. Yongzhou fried rice could be served during business hours, but it took a while for the dishes to be served. But Rujiamos were different. Due to the limited supply of ingredients, they were usually sold out in the middle of the opening hours. Many customers left in the line could only leave in disappointment. There was a customer who couldn't come to line up in advance because of work, and he didn't get to eat after waiting in line for 3 days. Meg even wanted to save one for him when he saw that disappointed look in his eyes. He felt a little apologetic as he watched him leave. As the system had said, if the purchase of Rujiamos was limited to 1 per customer, the total number of customers in the restaurant would be about 300. The 200 Rujiamos he had prepared would be enough for everyone who wanted to buy one. But Rujiamos were the staple food. For big eaters like Harrison and Sargeras, 1 Rujiamo was not enough at all. Limiting the purchase of Rujiamos was more torturous than not being able to eat at all. These soybeans come from the white soil in the depths of the Orc's twilight forest, and they're rich in protein. There's only one piece of land on the entire northern continent that has such a unique landscape and soil that has yet to be discovered and developed. I've set up an advanced plantation there. The soybeans grown here are exposed to sunlight for up to 14 hours a day. Nano-robots remove pests, and they are grown naturally. They have fully absorbed the nutrients of the white soil. The protein content of these soybeans is 5 times that of ordinary soybeans. They are rich in vitamins and minerals. They have an immediate beautifying effect, and the long-term effects will be even better. The system's voice paused, and then it changed its tone. That's why, if you eat too much, it will be too much of a burden on your body, and you may not be able to digest it completely. So you're saying that 1 bowl of tofu pudding made from these soybeans is better than 5 bowls? Meg was a little surprised. In terms of protein content and quality, it is about 4.5 bowls, the system said seriously. Little Amy and Ugly Duckling had 2 bowls in the morning. Are they already over the limit? Meg asked anxiously. 2 servings per meal is within the acceptable range. Also, they are in the developing stage, so they need more protein, so you don't have to worry about their safety, the system said. Meg heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing that. Luckily, the system was reliable. He thought for a moment, and then asked, by the way, system, I should be able to buy the first strength point the day after tomorrow. How much is the next one? 50,000 gold coins, the system replied calmly. 5. System, you're fucking robbing me. Meg was furious. He had saved 10,000 gold coins for half a month, and 50,000 gold coins was a huge sum. According to the restaurant's current income, even if he didn't have any extra expenses, it would take him more than a month to afford it. Of course, what made Meg more concerned was that the price had suddenly increased by 5 times. If the second portion was sold for 50,000 gold coins, then wouldn't the third and fourth portions be sold for 100,000 or even 200,000 gold coins? Although the restaurant's current income was good, if this was the case, Meg's plan to buy strength points directly with money wouldn't be able to make much progress in the short term. The system doesn't recommend the host to buy strength points directly. Please take your identity as a candidate for the God of Cookery seriously and efficiently complete the mission issued by the system. In the process of completing the mission, there is a high chance that you will be rewarded with strength points. This is the normal way to obtain strength points, the system said seriously. You really think so? Meg was a little skeptical. If the host insists on buying, the system will reluctantly sell it out of humanitarian consideration. However, in principle, the system still insists that the system should work hard to complete the mission, the system said seriously. Chapter 159. Luna, it's not every day that you come to visit me, so stop reading. Otherwise, a beautiful girl like you is going to become a bookworm. In a garden pavilion, a young woman in a long blue dress snatched the book from Luna's hands, and said with a smile, "Tell me, did anything interesting happen during this time? I've been staying in the city lord's castle every day, and I'm bored to death." The young woman appeared to be around 17 to 18 years of age. She had an oval face with delicate features, and a pair of thin eyebrows that were slightly raised. Her hair was all tied up into a ponytail, revealing her smooth forehead. Even though she was wearing a long dress, she gave off an aura that made one involuntarily want to lower their heads. "Vivian, give the book back to me. There are only 2 pages left." Luna looked up at the young woman in the blue dress with a resigned smile. "No, I'll keep those 2 pages for next time. Otherwise, I don't know when you'll come to visit me again." Vivian clasped her hands behind her back, and shook her head as she spoke. "Let me finish reading it, and I promise I'll come to visit you again on my next day off." Luna extended a hand with a serious expression. "As if I'd believe you. You said the same thing last time, and you only came to visit me after half a month." Vivian gently patted Luna's outstretched hand, and sat down on the stool with the book in her hand. The pavilion had a round roof, and there was a circle of benches around it. There was a stone table and 4 stone stools in the center, and there were 2 fruit platters on the table, upon which some seasonal fruits were placed. A child fell ill last weekend, and I had to take care of her for 2 days, so I had to stand her up. Sorry, Luna said in a resigned manner as she looked at the book that Vivian was sitting on. Is the child all right now? Vivian picked up an orange and peeled it before handing half of it to Luna. She then broke off a piece and put it into her mouth. It was too late when we found out. She left peacefully. Luna shook her head. Her eyelids drooped and her expression was a little gloomy. Vivian had just placed the orange into her mouth when her hand froze. She looked at Luna, who was staring at the orange in her hand, and a hint of heartache appeared in her eyes. She broke off a piece of orange and placed it in front of her mouth. With a smile, she consoled, perhaps this is also a form of relief for her. After leaving your arms, her heart should feel warm. It's okay, I'm used to it. Luna smiled. Her smile was as clean as the lilies on her scarf. She opened her mouth and took a bite of the orange. She chewed and nodded with a smile. It's so sweet. This year's oranges seem to be very good. You should be enjoying life in Rodu, but you came to Chaos City to take care of so many children. You can't even bear to buy oranges for yourself. You have to take good care of yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to write a letter to your father. Vivian was a little angry as she looked at Luna. Oranges had been on sale for half a month, but Luna, who loved oranges the most, still hadn't eaten any. She must have spent all her money on those children again. Your father is already in his 70s, and he's so busy. Don't complain to him because of an orange. Luna couldn't help but burst into laughter upon hearing that. She flicked Vivian's forehead with a slender finger, and her mood improved significantly. She thought to herself for a moment before smiling as she said, "The money that my family sent me yesterday arrived. I asked for a little more this month, so I'll take good care of myself. Speaking of fun, there's one. Or should I say, an interesting person. That hurts." Vivian leaned back with a hand over her forehead. A detective's expression immediately appeared in her eyes upon hearing Luna's words. An interesting person. Don't tell me it's a man. Could it be that you've already met someone you like after not seeing him for just a few days? What are you thinking? Luna glared at Vivian, and a faint blush appeared on her face for some reason. Even though she felt that Meg was a mysterious and special person, she definitely didn't view him as someone she liked. After all, he was still Amy's father, and perhaps her mother was just temporarily absent. She had to be a very beautiful elf to be able to give birth to such an adorable little girl like Amy, right? TSK, TSK. You're blushing, it must be a man. Vivian leaned forward and looked into Luna's eyes for a while before asking, "Luna, you're not really in love with him, are you?" "What do you mean?" "It's not what you think. He's a restaurant owner, and his daughter is my student." Luna pushed Vivian's head back slightly with a grumpy expression. "He's a student's parent." Vivian leaned back with a disappointed expression. She looked at Luna with a serious expression as she warned, "Don't be blindly in love with him. It's not certain if you'll be able to make it big, but Chaos School definitely won't let you continue to be a teacher if they find out about this." "Don't worry, I'm already prepared to dedicate my life to education," Luna said with a smile. "That won't do. You'll be so pitiful when you're old." Vivian shook her head, and then curiously asked, "What's so interesting about a student's parent?" "His cooking is very delicious." Luna nodded with a serious expression. "Really?" Vivian's eyes immediately lit up with anticipation as she asked, "How delicious is it? Is it as delicious as the roast pig from the Frere Tavern?" Well, it's not easy to compare. Luna thought to herself for a moment, and decided to leave some suspense as she smiled, and said, if our city lord allows you to go out one day, you can go and try it. It's that restaurant at the very end of the Aiden Square, Amy's. I plan to go there again tonight. Ah. Luna, you're so naughty. You know I'm going to attend a banquet today, and father won't let me go out after the trouble I caused last time, but you're still trying to seduce me with delicious food. Vivian immediately jumped up from her stool and grumbled. Yes, I know. Luna suppressed her laughter and nodded. A young girl's bell-like laughter sounded from the garden. Father, are you saying that you're going to take us to that restaurant where you bring us delicious food every day? In a horse farm on the outskirts of the city, Palmer was sitting on the back of a small white horse, wearing a black jacket and brown pants. He was wearing a pair of shiny black riding boots, and he was looking at George with an elated expression on his face. There was a 3-year-old little boy with a mushroom-shaped head sitting on another small white horse, and he was holding onto the buckle of the saddle tightly. After 3 seconds, he suddenly came to his senses, and he raised his little hand with elation as he yelled, "Rainbow fried rice! Rainbow fried rice!" Yes, that's the restaurant. The owner of the restaurant has a super beautiful and adorable daughter. Palmer, don't you like little girls the most, and Palmer likes big sisters the most? I'll take you there in a bit. George nodded with a smile as he looked at his 2 sons with doting eyes. Really? A super adorable little girl? Palmer's eyes lit up. Chapter 160. The sun was setting in the west. At the entrance of Gaia Hotel, Sally picked up the sheet that was drying in the sun. Smelling the faint scent of soap on it, she felt a lot more relaxed. She looked at the woman with a big golden bird embroidered on her chair, and said, "Madam, I'm going out for a while. I won't be back for dinner tonight." The woman appeared to be in her 40s. She was quite thin, and her long black hair was tied up in a simple bun with a silver hairpin. Her appearance was quite ordinary, but she appeared to be quite gentle. Hearing Sally's words, she put down the embroidery in her hands and looked up at her. She smiled and nodded, and said, "All right, be careful on the road." "I will." Sally nodded with a smile. She went in with the sheet, and soon came out again. She nodded at the madam, who had started her embroidery again. She took a look at the half-finished embroidery in her hand, and then turned to leave. Although the salary was not high, the lady boss had been taking good care of her these days. Her food and accommodation were free of charge. Although the food was very light, it was just right to her taste, just missing some flavor. Of course, it was still incomparable to the delicious Yangzhou fried rice. If I only eat 1 portion, it should be enough. I'll be able to earn it back in a month. Sally tightened her grip on her purse, and nodded firmly as she quickened her pace. At the entrance of Chaos School, Crassus waved his hand with a smile, and said, "Novan, you are indeed a loyal friend. But that's all for today. I have to go for dinner. Next time, next time, next time. Crassus, don't be in such a hurry to leave. We haven't seen each other for more than 10 years. I'll take you to Friar's Tavern tonight. The roast pig there is very good. You probably can't even get such delicious food in Rodu." A man in a black and white robe took Crassus' hand and said with a smile. The man looked to be in his 40s. His short hair was neatly combed back into a 280. His face was a little square, and he looked dignified without being angry. However, he looked a little drunk, and his cheeks were a little red. He held Crassus's hand and refused to let go. "What's so good about roast suckling pig? I'm going to eat sweet tofu pudding tonight. That taste is unforgettable." Crassus had an intoxicated look on his face. He still couldn't forget the bowl of tofu pudding he had eaten in the morning. Tofu pudding. Like pig's brain or monkey's brain? Novin looked at Crassus in confusion. Don't you hate those things the most? Why do you suddenly like her? It's not that kind of vulgar thing. It's not really a brain, but it's 1,000 times, 10,000 times more delicious. Crassus shook his head with a smile as he brushed Novin's hand away. You're already 80 years old, so you're not a kid anymore. Don't think about following me around all the time. Brandley and the school's principal stood off to the side with peculiar expressions on their faces. They were also looking at Crassus with astonishment in their eyes. In Chaos City, even the city lord and the lord of the Great Temple didn't dare to speak to the principal like that. After all, the principal had fought with the lord of the Great Temple, and it had taken over a month to repair the massive hole in the roof of the main hall. In the end, the lord of the Great Temple had to make a concession to appease the principal. However, Crassus was now lecturing a junior, but the principal didn't seem to be angry at all. This was quite surprising. I haven't seen you in so many years, and I really miss you. Seeing as you're going to settle down in Chaos City and teach disciples in Chaos School, we can drink together often in the future. Novin smiled, and then asked, Is that tofu pudding really that delicious? Do you want me to try it with you? Sure. Not only is the tofu pudding delicious, the other two dishes are also extremely delicious. It's a restaurant owned by my precious disciple's father. Alright, let's go now. We still have to line up. Crassus nodded, and was in a hurry to leave. Principal, there's a banquet at the city lord's castle tonight, and you and your wife have been invited. Do you think? The principal hurriedly interjected with an uneasy expression. I almost forgot, Crassus. Looks like I won't be able to go with you today. However, you took the restaurant owner's daughter as your disciple. You're not thinking of freeloading every day, are you? Novin nodded. He had almost forgotten about this. The so-called banquet was actually an informal meeting between the Great Temple, the City Lord's Castle, and Chaos School. All of the key members of the three parties would be present, and a meeting would be held after the meal. This was a monthly meeting to enhance communication, and as the leader of Chaos School, he naturally couldn't be absent. Do I look like someone who would freeload? Go ahead, I'm going to line up. Crassus raised a hand, and turned to walk toward the Aiden Square. He looked as if he couldn't bear to look back as he murmured, freeloading. I even paid for his daughter's meals at home. Hubby, let's do it again, a seductive voice sounded from a lavishly decorated room. It was very seductive. Spare me, honey. I really can't take it anymore. I'll go buy dinner for you, right now. Vasenio opened the door, and his clothes were disheveled. He leaned against the wall as he walked out. The setting sun shone on his face, and he narrowed his eyes in a daze as he heaved an internal sigh. I'm the one begging for mercy again. What the hell is this? The door closed, and a seductive young woman was half leaning against the headboard of a large red bed. The blanket only covered half of her body, revealing half of her voluptuous breasts. Her skin was extremely well maintained, and it looked as if it would break at the slightest touch. The blush on her face had yet to recede, and she was looking at the door with a dazed expression. After a while, she smiled, and said, My hubby seems to have become even more powerful. Boss, we just found the nest of the flaming crows. Why don't we wait a little longer? They'll definitely come back when it's dark. That's 5 Ruggiamos we're talking about. Keel asked with a perplexed expression as he followed behind Sargeras with his rod in hand. What's wrong with you? He asked as he looked at Sargeras, who was striding forward quickly. Mond, who was carrying 2 big sacks, also had a similar expression. Today was the first time the Burning Legion had set out on an expedition, and they had reaped great rewards. Why are we working so hard on these missions? Sargeras asked without stopping. For Ruggiamos. Keel and Mond answered almost at the same time. Sargeras nodded and said, "The restaurant is about to open. We have to go to the Chaos Guild to cash in today's rewards, and then take a shower before going to buy Ruggiamo's. The restaurant's business is so good. If we're late, we might miss the last Ruggiamo of the day." "That won't do." Keel and Mond immediately became nervous, and their footsteps quickened along with Sargeras. "There's going to be a lot of wailing today." In the restaurant, Meg looked at the menu in his hand. On it was written, "Tofu pudding, savory or sweet, 200 copper coins per serving. Note, 1 serving per person." Chapter 161. Did you hear? Mamie's is releasing a new product today. I heard it's called tofu pudding. 2 great magicians tried it this morning, and they got into a fight because of the different flavors. Really? Then I have to try it. I still can't forget the Yangzhou fried rice you brought me to eat last time. But this meal will cost me half of my secret savings this month. We're really in the same boat. We can only eat it 3 times a month at most. My kids are getting ready to go to school, so I don't dare to waste my money. But I still have to try such a delicious dish. Great magicians really got into a fight over a dish. Where's the restaurant you're talking about? Is it really as good as you say? Such conversations took place among many customers who had been to Mamie's. The fight between Crassus and Julian in the morning was like a catalyst, turning what was originally an ordinary new product into a hot topic among the regular customers. Even those who had never been to Mamie's were attracted by the topic. They were all curious about the delicacy that could make 2 great magicians fight over it. A long line had already formed at the entrance of Mamie's. However, the line tonight was a little strange. It automatically divided into 2 lines, with Crassus and Julian standing at the front. The 2 of them stood more than a meter apart, side by side. Although there was no confrontation between them, an aura of ice and fire still formed between them. A frost flower bloomed on the tiles under Julian's feet. It also looked like a large snowflake that had been carefully carved. The lines were clear and delicate, and it slowly rotated, attracting everyone's attention. At Crassus' feet, a flaming bird was slowly flapping its wings. It stared at the snowflake under Julian's feet with a burning gaze, but it didn't act rashly. When the 2 met, a clear dividing line was formed in the middle. They didn't give in to each other, and for the time being, they weren't too aggressive. The aura was controlled by them to an area of about 1 square meter. Other than that, the area wasn't affected. "Sweetness is justice," Crassus said righteously as he gently tapped his magician's staff on the ground. "Salty is the way of the king." Julian's hoarse voice rang out. His voice was cold and piercing, like metal scraping against each other. It felt like it had penetrated deep into the mind. The 2 of them looked at each other. A battle seemed to be about to break out at any moment. After a moment of silence, they shifted their gazes away, unwilling to submit to each other. The customers at the back of the line felt relieved again. If they were to fight at such a close distance, they might not even have the chance to escape. They were the only ones who had such a thrilling experience just by lining up. The customers in the second row of the 2 lines had already consciously retreated 2 meters away to avoid being accidentally injured. Although it seemed a little strange to be separated by such a distance, the customers in the line behind all agreed with their behavior. Everyone was afraid. The frost dragon in the morning had left a deep impression on them. Even though they hadn't tasted tofu pudding before, the customers behind them were already lining up according to their own preferences, following Julian and Crassus. There was still about half an hour before the opening of the restaurant, and there were already more than 20 people in the line. The 2 lines each had a dozen people, and it seemed like they were evenly matched. It seemed like they had been influenced by Crassus and Julian. They hadn't tasted tofu pudding before, but the two lines already felt a little hostile toward each other, and the way they looked at each other was a little different. "Ha! Brother, what's with the lines today? Why don't I understand?" Maksuji and Andreas came together, and looked at the two lines with confusion as they asked one of the people in the line. "The lines tonight are divided according to salty and sweet. Are you salty or sweet?" That person sized up Maksuji and Andreas with a hint of scrutiny in his eyes. "Oh." Maksuji glanced at Julian and Crassus, who were standing at the very front, and immediately understood what he meant. He immediately felt as if he had found a team. He extended his hand, and earnestly said, "Allies." "Hello." That person faltered for a moment, but still reached out to shake hands with him. "He's a heretic from the sweet party." Maksuji immediately sold Andreas out. Julian and the others all looked at Andreas in unison. "Wow, do you have to be so scary?" Andreas' eyes widened, and he subconsciously took 2 steps back, feeling a lot of pressure. "Don't be afraid, our sweet party isn't weaker than anyone else," a burly man in the line next to him said confidently, and the others all looked at him encouragingly. Andreas was instantly emboldened, and he quickly walked into the sweet party line. The number of people gradually increased, and most of them were like Maksuji and Andreas. There were also some customers who wanted to try both salty and sweet, but they didn't have the courage to force a third line between Julian and Crassus. They could only choose a line that was more inclined to the sweet party and wait until they entered the restaurant to make a decision. So many people. It's only been a few days, and the restaurant's business is already so good. Sally, whose face was covered with a white veil at some point, saw the long line in front of the restaurant from afar, and couldn't help but show surprise in her eyes. When she first came to the restaurant, there were almost no customers. Humans, dwarves, orcs. I have to line up with them, and even eat at the same table. Sally stopped in her tracks, and her expression was a little hesitant and conflicted. Although she had eaten in the same restaurant as a dwarf last time, there were almost no customers in the restaurant at that time, and she had been sitting alone. There were already so many customers lining up before the restaurant even opened, and there would definitely be more people later. Maybe there would be a dwarf sitting next to her, and an orc sitting across from her. She, who was slightly obsessed with cleanliness, might not be able to eat. The restaurant's business seems to be pretty good. Delicacies won't be buried after all. Not far away, Luna also stopped in her tracks. She looked at the line outside the restaurant with a surprised expression. When she had first come here, she had been worried that Mag's price would be too high, and that it would be difficult for the restaurant to open for business. Now, it seemed that her worries were completely unnecessary. If there are too many people, I'll bring it back to eat. Sally clenched her fists and walked towards the restaurant. The delicious taste of Yangzhou fried rice made her unable to make up her mind to turn around. Maybe there will be a new surprise this time. Luna smiled and walked quickly towards the restaurant. Chapter 162. Many people's eyes lit up when they saw the two of them. Luna, with her straight black hair, was wearing a light gray linen dress. She looked intelligent and beautiful, just like the golden lilies embroidered on her white scarf. Sally's face was covered with a scarf, and she was tall and slender. She wore a light silver dress that was embroidered with golden thread, revealing her exquisite collarbone and a pair of long, slender legs. Even though her appearance couldn't be seen clearly, one could tell from her eyes that she was most likely a cold and beautiful fairy. The sudden arrival of the two delightful beauties made everyone look forward to seeing who they would stand on. Luna and Sally looked at each other and were both stunned. They didn't know what this guy was talking about. "I'm just here to eat. Why did I choose the salty and sweet dishes?" Luna tried to ask. What was tofu pudding? She didn't know at all. If she had a brain, it sounded so scary. She was only here to eat a plate of Yangzhou fried rice and then secretly take a Rujiamo back to the teacher's dorm. Sally, with her face covered, also looked at the guy with confusion. She didn't say anything. In order to not expose her identity, she had to wear a veil and try not to talk. After all, this restaurant was so popular now. Maybe elves would come to eat here. If she was discovered, it would be troublesome. You don't know. Seeing the confusion on their faces, the young man understood what was going on. He smiled and explained, tofu pudding is a new dish released by Mr. Mac today. It will be officially sold tonight. However, it said that there are 2 flavors, sweet and salty. This morning, the 2 archmages in front of us tried it, and they fought over the flavors. After listening to the young man's explanation, a look of understanding appeared on both of their faces. It turned out that the 2 teams in front of the restaurant had separated because of the taste of the new dish, tofu pudding, and the 2 magic casters who had instigated this conflict were actually the 2 magic casters. Lord Crassus. Luna's eyes lit up when she saw the archmage in a white magician's robe. His long white hair was hanging down his back, and he was holding a staff that was as tall as a grown man. Her grandpa visited Lord Crassus once a year, and took her with him once when she was little. Why is he in Chaos City? What powerful mana fluctuations and control. Even father can't achieve such a level of control. Sally looked at the firebirds and snowflakes under their feet. His ability to maintain the balance calmly and show his power without batting an eyelid is terrifying. Other than the Elven Queen, she had never seen such a powerful magician. She herself was a 7th-tier magician, although she would often choose to use the bow as her weapon of attack and deterrence. Luna nodded at Sally, and chose to stand with Julian's team. I don't know what kind of dish it is, but I prefer the salty ones. Sally didn't say anything. She walked straight to Crassus' team. Her intention was very obvious. She preferred the sweet ones. So many people are looking forward to it. Mr. Meg seems to be very powerful. Looking at the dozens of people in front of her and the line behind her, a smile appeared on Luna's face. She didn't really care who she was sitting at the same table with. As a teacher of Chaos School, the first rule of a teacher was to treat all students equally. This rule was deeply ingrained in the soul of almost every teacher. If there was discrimination against a student because of their race, Principal Novin would expel them mercilessly. Previously, a teacher had mocked a dwarf student in class and was expelled from the school. She was the granddaughter of a high-ranking member of the Grey Temple. Later, the high-ranking member of the Grey Temple came to the school to plead for leniency and put pressure on the principal. Then, the principal's office was in an uproar. People from the Grey Temple carried a person out of the ruins in a panic. After that, the female teacher didn't come to class again. It was said that the high-ranking member didn't even attend the 3-party banquet after that. No one knew whether he was angry or scared. It could be said that Chaos School's independence, equality, and freedom were all due to Principal Novin's cold exterior, strict requirements for the teachers, and gentle attitude towards the students. These were all nurtured over several decades. This was also the reason why she gave up the luxurious life in Rodu and came here. She liked the atmosphere of Chaos School. She liked the feeling that children of different backgrounds and races could sit together in class and laugh together. It was like a fairy tale. Shouldn't such a school and such a teaching style be promoted across the entire continent? If possible, she was willing to work hard for this for the rest of her life and be the principal's follower. Since it was boring to wait in line, some of the people who came together started chatting. Since the 2 of them were in the same line, they chatted rather harmoniously. If they were in the opposite line, they would have already started mocking each other due to their close relationship. What's so good about sweet tofu pudding, Andreas? You're not young anymore, but you still like sweet things like a child. Don't you feel ashamed? Mo Shioji looked at Andreas with a mocking smile. Mo Shioji's words immediately drew murderous glances from the sweet team. Even Crassus, who was standing at the front of the line, turned to look at him coldly. Do you have to be so scary? Mo Shioji shrunk his neck. He had only wanted to tease Andreas a little. This was a normal tease between friends, but he didn't think that it would incite public outrage. Crassus' glare also made him want to find a hole in the ground to hide in. Well said. Eating sweet things every day makes you fat. Yeah, salty food is appetizing and healthy. Salty food is the most delicious. There are actually people who don't like salty food. They've forgotten their roots. However, Mo Shioji's words drew looks of praise and support from the salty team. Some people even joined the mocking army. Their words were sharp and merciless. Sweet can bring happiness and happiness to people. As for salty food, I've only heard that it's rubbing salt on the wound. There's no need to fight. In the sweet team, a middle-aged man in a black robe waved his sleeves. That's right. Eating a little candy every day can increase your happiness by a few times. People who like to eat candy are always lucky. Eat salty food. You'll die of thirst. The sweet party also retorted sarcastically, and the atmosphere outside the restaurant became a little tense for a while. The two sides engaged in a war of words, going back and forth, and arguing very happily. Ding! Right at this moment, the crisp sound of a bell came from the entrance of the restaurant. Everyone's quarrel gradually died down. Some people looked toward the entrance in confusion. Could it be that Meg felt that everyone was quarreling too fiercely and came out to mediate? Or did he feel that everyone was too enthusiastic and wanted them to come in early? The door slowly opened inwards. A small stool was first handed out. The gap widened a little, and Amy squeezed out of the door with a small stool in one hand and Ugly Duckling in the other. Everyone's eyes fell on Amy, somewhat puzzled. Amy placed the stool on the steps at the entrance and sat down obediently. She held Ugly Duckling in her arms before looking up at everyone. Chapter 163. It was quiet outside the restaurant. Everyone looked at Amy, who was sitting on the stool she had brought over, with a little orange kitten in her arms. Their expressions were a little strange. They thought that Meg would come out to stop the fight, but unexpectedly, it was Amy who came out. Not only did she not stop the fight, she even asked them to continue. For a moment, they didn't know how to continue. Why is there a half-elf girl here? A customer who was here for the first time asked curiously. That's the restaurant owner's daughter. Isn't she super cute? The person standing in front of him said with a smile. Yes, although I don't really like half-breeds, I have to admit that this little girl is really cute. The customer nodded in agreement. Many people nodded in agreement. This sentence was what they were thinking. Although they wanted to complain, they didn't know where to start when they saw Amy, who was sitting on the stool with her big blue eyes looking curiously at everyone with the kitten in her arms, so they could only hold it in. Amy has indeed become a lot more cheerful and confident. She's like a little kid now. It seems that Mr. Meg has been taking good care of her recently. Luna looked at Amy, who was sitting at the door, and couldn't hide the fondness and relief in her eyes. Amy was only a 4-year-old child, but she had always been very sensible. She didn't act like a child her age, which made people feel sorry for her. At such a young age, not only did she have to take care of her hunger and cold, she also had to think about her father at home. She lacked the intelligence that a child should have and was a little timid. But now, she was a little different. Not only did her appearance and clothes change, but more importantly, her eyes were full of hope and intelligence. It was normal for children at this age to be a little mischievous and willful. These were all part of her nature. Luna was very pleased to see these things reappearing in Amy. Why does it feel a little familiar? Sally looked at Amy, who was sitting on the stool, and frowned slightly. She looked a little puzzled. Amy's appearance and tone just now, as well as her black-bellied temperament, gave her an inexplicable sense of familiarity. But she didn't remember coming into contact with any black-bellied little elves. Master Halfbeard, Master Turtle, do you still want to fight? Amy asked curiously as she looked at the firebird beneath Crass's feet and the snowflake beneath Julian's feet. No more fighting, no more fighting. The two said almost at the same time. The firebird under Crass's feet fluttered twice, turned into a small flame, and disappeared without a trace. The frozen snowflakes under Julian's feet also cracked with a crack, leaving only a drop of water on the ground. The surprised atmosphere at the restaurant's entrance immediately dissipated, and the people at the back of the line heaved a sigh of relief. They looked at Amy and thought to themselves that the young lady wasn't completely useless after all. Actually, it's fine if you guys want to fight. Amy was a little disappointed when she saw the magic dissipating beneath their feet. Crassus's and Julian's expressions froze as they looked at Amy. Their precious disciple really didn't think the matter was small at all. It's fine if you don't fight today. You don't have to feel troubled. Amy looked at the two of them and consoled them earnestly. Anyway, we can see each other every day in the future, so there will be many opportunities. Crassus laughed dryly as he looked at Amy. If he didn't know that Irina didn't have a daughter, he would definitely suspect that this little girl was her daughter. Otherwise, how could she be so sharp-tongued and naturally dark-skinned? Julian was also a little dazed. He remembered that little girl in the past, who also wanted to see the world in chaos. She would trick the two of them into fighting all day long, and then she would get a little stool to sit at the side and watch the show. When she was happy, she would even clap her hands and cheer. That was considered a great compliment. Teacher Luna. Amy soon spotted Luna in the line, and waved happily at her. Luna also smiled and waved back. She was usually a little aloof outside the school. After all, being alone in Chaos City was a kind of self-protection. But when it came to children, she couldn't hide her joy. There's also a beautiful big sister elf. Amy also spotted Sally. Although she had only seen her once, this big sister elf was the first elf she had ever met, and also the first elf who told her that she could be as beautiful as her, so she still remembered her. Sally nodded. She was a little worried that Amy would call her name in public when she saw her recognized, but it seemed that her worry was unnecessary. Amy might have already forgotten her name. After greeting the people she knew, Amy sat quietly on the little stool with her chin in her hands, waiting to watch the show. Ugly Duckling poked its little head out from between her hands, and also looked at everyone curiously. It was a little shy in the beginning, but it had gotten used to seeing all kinds of customers coming and going in the restaurant these days. In the silence, the debate between savory and sweet that had come to an abrupt end began again. They still didn't know what tofu pudding was, so the two sides were mainly arguing about whether savory or sweet was better, and were having a great time arguing. Amazing! Amy clapped her little hands. Although she didn't understand a word they were saying, she still felt that it was worth praising. Ugly Duckling turned its head left and right, and also clapped its little paws. Boss, they seem to be arguing. Should I go and talk to them? Yabamiya walked to the door and listened for a while, then turned to Meg, who was eating his Yangzhou fried rice unhurriedly, and asked. No, it's fine. A certain degree of argument can be used as entertainment after a meal, and it's good for the restaurant's development. Meg shook his head with a smile. He looked at the customers who were arguing outside the window. The foodies in this world are really cute. They can even start a debate about savory and sweet over a dish that they haven't tried yet. Amazing, amazing. Let Amy come in and eat." After quietly finishing a bowl of fried rice, Meg looked at the time. There were still 5 minutes to go before the restaurant opened. He got up and cleared the plates, then looked at Yabamiya and said, "1 serving of tofu pudding per person. Do you remember this?" Yes, I remember." Yabamiya nodded vigorously. Although he didn't know why Meg limited the number of tofu pudding per person, he was sure that he was right. Amy re-entered the door with Ugly Duckling and a stool in her arms. Her eyes lit up when she saw Meg coming out with 2 bowls of tofu pudding and a rujiamo. "Wash your hands first. We'll eat when the customers come in," Meg said with a smile. "Okay." Amy put Ugly Duckling on the ground, then ran into the kitchen with the stool. She put it under her feet, turned on the tap, and carefully washed her hands. Then she climbed onto a chair. There was sweet tofu pudding on her left, savory tofu pudding on her right, and a rujiamo between them. There was a spoon on top of the rujiamo. She grabbed the spoon, and there were stars in her eyes. Chapter 164. The 2 lines of over 100 people stood facing each other, arguing fiercely. Some of them were already red in the face, and they were on the verge of fighting. Fortunately, both sides still had some sense of reason. Otherwise, the entrance of the restaurant would have turned into a wrestling ring. Krasu and Urian, who had been fighting fiercely in the morning, stood in the front row expressionlessly without saying a word. They were acting like gang leaders now. Meg's eyelids twitched as soon as he opened the door to the noisy quarrel that greeted him. This wasn't like the scolding wars that he saw on the internet in his previous life. This was the real-life version, and the enhanced one at that. If a fight really broke out, it would be a chaotic battle between magic casters, demons, knights, and orcs, all shouting, "Saltiness is justice," and "Sweetness is the way to go." Meg only thought about it for a moment, but the scene was too beautiful, and he didn't dare to continue. In order to not affect the restaurant's normal business, I feel like it's necessary to build a sweet and savory arena. If there are any controversial dishes in the future, it'll give them a place to express their opinions. Meg looked back at Amy, who was holding a spoon and full of anticipation. The little one should like it very much. Meg's voice interrupted everyone's bickering, and the voices gradually died down. Everyone turned to look at the entrance of the restaurant in unison. Even though they were unwilling to admit defeat, they were only arguing because it was simply too boring to wait in line outside. Now that the restaurant was open, it was naturally more important to eat. Of course, part of the reason was that there was a need to fight after the meal. "Please come in." Meg opened the door and stepped aside. He was not going to get involved in the battle between sweet and savory, and of course, he couldn't let them vent their anger on him. That would be too unfair. Crassus and Julian stepped onto the stairs at the same time. They looked at each other, and neither of them gave way to the other. They squeezed through the door and walked toward their usual seats. "Hello, Master Halfbeard, Master Turtle," Amy greeted the two. "Hello." The two of them nodded, and their gazes fell on the 2 bowls of tofu pudding in front of Amy, and they couldn't look away. The noodle bowls used at night were smaller than the usual ones, but they contained more beans than the small bowls used in the morning. A faint fragrance of beans drifted out from the kitchen. The customers behind him also followed suit. They did not give way to each other and forcibly squeezed through the door one by one. "You first." Luna and Sally raised their legs at the same time, but Luna quickly withdrew her leg and raised her hand. "Thank you." Sally looked at Luna in surprise, nodded, and walked into the restaurant. Meg looked at Sally, and even though she was wearing a veil, he was still able to recognize her at first glance. Seeing that she had no intention of greeting him, he could only give her a polite nod. "Mr. Meg," Luna greeted Meg, who was holding the door. "Miss Luna." Meg also nodded with a smile. He didn't expect Luna to come today. Mr. Mac, please give me 2 bowls of Yangzhou fried rice and a dose of heavy medicine Rugiamo. I can't take it anymore, Vicenio said weakly to Meg, holding the door. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg nodded. He looked at the pale-faced Vicenio with a strange expression. It seemed like he was the one who had to beg for mercy this time. However, he was rather curious about the woman behind him. What kind of woman could make him look like this? Vicenio walked in with the door and sat down at the same table as he had at noon. He felt that it would be a burden to even walk a few more steps. The customers entered the restaurant one after another. Those who came in early had the priority to find a seat. Those who came in late had to share a table. Those who came later didn't even have the chance to share a table. They had to line up from the counter, which stretched all the way out. Luckily, the passage in the middle was wide enough to not affect the customers on both sides. Luna sat down across from Sally. Soon, 2 other women who came with her sat down. Sally let out a sigh of relief. Eating in front of Luna, who looked so well-mannered, was much better than eating with orcs and dwarves. It seemed that she could enjoy a bowl of Yangzhou fried rice today. I'll have a sweet tofu pudding and a Rugiamo. I'll have a savory tofu pudding and a bowl of Yangzhou fried rice. 1 sweet tofu pudding and 1 savory tofu pudding. I want to see which one tastes better. As soon as the customers sat down, they began to order. Yabamiya memorized the order in which they entered the restaurant. I'm sorry, sir. There's only 1 tofu pudding per person. Please choose a flavor, Yabamiya said apologetically to the customer who had ordered 1 tofu pudding for each flavor. There's such a rule. The customer was a little surprised. He flipped open the menu on the table and saw that there was indeed a limit of 1 tofu pudding per person. He was a little surprised at the price of 200 copper coins. It was even cheaper than Rugiamo. He thought for a moment and nodded. Then I'll have the savory one. Everyone took their seats and waited for their orders. Those who came late stood in line. Their eyes all fell on Amy and the 2 big bowls in front of her. In the white porcelain bowl, there was a piece of soft, white, jade-like cube. It looked very elastic. The bowl on the left was covered with sweet syrup, and the bowl on the right was covered with chopped vegetables. The faint aroma of tofu pudding and syrup wafted in the air. Everyone couldn't help but swallow their saliva. This should be the tofu pudding, right? A bald middle-aged man standing off to the side asked curiously. That's right. Amy nodded with a spoon in her hand. Little owner, is the tofu pudding delicious? The bald middle-aged man asked curiously. Hearing this, everyone stretched their necks, wanting to hear Amy's evaluation. There were also many customers who were hesitating on whether or not they should try the new product. 200 copper coins was not a small amount of money for many people. Do you want to know? Amy looked up at the bald middle-aged man and asked. She waved the spoon in her hand, as if she wanted him to try the tofu pudding himself. Yes. The middle-aged man nodded. Then I'll try it for you. Amy nodded and scooped up a spoonful of savory tofu pudding. The white tofu wobbled in the spoon, and the orange-red sauce slowly flowed down the cut. Chopped pickled vegetables and shrimp were garnished on top of the tofu pudding, and she slowly put it into her mouth. The sweet tofu pudding melted in her mouth, and the savory pickled vegetables and shrimp blended perfectly with it. Her bright blue eyes immediately lit up as she basked in the flavor of the tofu pudding. She didn't even need to chew before the tofu pudding blossomed. Amy swallowed the tofu pudding with a gulp, and her little face was filled with enjoyment. She held the spoon and looked up at the bald middle-aged man with a serious expression. Uncle, the tofu pudding is super delicious. Chapter 165. She took another spoonful of tofu pudding and swayed her body from side to side happily. She put down the spoon and took a bite of the rujiamo in front of her with both hands, making a slight crunching sound. One mouthful of savory tofu pudding, one mouthful of laji rujiamo, and the other mouthful of salty rujiamo. She was so engrossed in eating that her cute little face was filled with a delightful smile, completely ignoring the onlookers. Is that even possible? Although he was very angry, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva as he watched Amy eat the tofu pudding. Watching Amy eat was a kind of torture to his stomach. Is it really that good? The customers wondered in their hearts. They wondered if Meg had deliberately let Amy eat the tofu pudding for them to see, but they couldn't take their eyes off the tofu pudding. It looks like the savory tofu pudding and rujiamo really go well together. Boss, I want another rujiamo. I can't take it anymore. I want rujiamo too. Here, one too. Finally, someone couldn't take it anymore and raised his hand to ask for another rujiamo. Like a domino effect, many people also followed suit and ordered rujiamos. Originally, they were looking forward to it, but after seeing Amy's sweet appearance, their expectations soared to 10 points. They couldn't take it anymore. Even the little boss liked savory tofu pudding. It means savory tofu pudding is better than sweet tofu pudding. This is a temporary victory for the savory side. Think about it for the sweet side. How can sweet tofu pudding and rujiamo be eaten together? That kind of combination is inhumane, a young man said excitedly. Sorry, I'm not a human. I like sweet things. A demon next to him looked at him with his red eyes without any emotion. You're not a human. The young man choked and couldn't find any words to refute. After seeing the real tofu pudding, the customers who were waiting in line for their food started to have a war of words again. But now, there was only one line in the restaurant. The sweet side and the savory side intertwined, creating an environment for debate. Is this tofu pudding? It looks really good, but it should be savory, right? Sally also stared at Amy and the tofu pudding in front of her. She looked to the side and saw the sweet tofu pudding, and her eyes lit up. Sweet. Is the golden red syrup made with honey? It smells so sweet. It's even thicker than the honey from the wind forest. Sweet. It must be very delicious. Sally was looking forward to it. She loved all kinds of sweet things, but the cooks at home, not much, to taste to. That rujiamo, she said, of the tofu pudding and of the tofu pudding. Sally took a look at the rujiamo in Amy's hand and rejected the idea in her heart. Her eyes fell on the menu on the table, and she looked at the price of 200 copper coins per order. Her expression immediately became a little conflicted. 600 copper coins for a plate of Yangzhou fried rice would cost her a month's salary, and another half a month's savings for a plate of tofu pudding. Elves had long lives, but if she spent every month's salary on a delicious meal, it would be a different life from when she had made up her mind to run away from the Lee family. Before she left, she had promised him that she would be able to travel across the entire Norland continent with just the dozen or so dragon coins she had with her, just like the princess of the past. Now, she was stuck in a small restaurant in Chaos City, her first stop. She had worked hard for more than 10 days, but the money she had earned wasn't even enough for a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. But the Yangzhou fried rice is so delicious. Now, there's another tofu pudding. If this goes on, I probably won't be able to leave Chaos City for the rest of my life. Sally suddenly felt powerless. Her dreams seemed to be leaving her. There was only one voice echoing in her head. Go to work, Sally. Go to work, Sally. Amy is so cute. The savory tofu pudding is really delicious. Luna was also looking at Amy, her eyes shining. But soon, she frowned. But if it's served with Ruggiemo? There are so many people here. Will it be embarrassing if I can't help but make a sound? What can I do for you, dear customers? Yabamiya made her way over to Luna and Sally with a smile. Her eyes were filled with awe as she looked at the two of them. Even though there had been many female customers in the restaurant during the past few days, none of them had the same temperament as these two. Yabamiya grew up in the greasy kitchen. What he admired most was the elegance of girls like them, who had a pair of slender and white hands. He looked down at his hands, which were full of scars and calluses, and subconsciously hid his hands behind the menu. I'd like a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. Sally looked up at Yabamiya with a hint of envy in her eyes. The last time she was here, there were no waitresses. This half-dragon girl must have become a waitress later. Since she works in a restaurant, she should be able to eat at least a plate of Yangzhou fried rice every day. In comparison, the vegetable noodles I eat every day are so pitiful. I have to work hard for a month to buy a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, but it's only a waitress's meal. How pitiful. And is sweet tofu pudding. Sally paused momentarily before raising her voice a few octaves, as if she had just made up her mind. Okay, please wait a moment. How about you, miss? Yabamiya nodded and turned to Luna. I'd like a savory tofu pudding, and... Luna looked at the almost empty Ruggiemo in Amy's hand and remembered the special feeling the Ruggiemo gave her that day. She nodded hard and said, 1 Ruggiemo. Okay, Yabamiya nodded and ordered for the other two ladies. Then she walked to the next table. As long as I work hard, I'll definitely earn it back. Sally clenched her fists and nodded vigorously. She then cast her gaze toward the kitchen as she murmured to herself, I wonder if this boss still needs employees. If it's possible, if there's a live stream in this world, Amy can become a popular snack live stream host, right? Meg looked at Amy, who was eating happily in front of everyone. He scooped up a spoonful of hot syrup and slowly poured it into the bowls of tofu pudding with a proud smile on his face. It was indeed a good idea to let Amy try a new dish first. Bring it out. Half savory and half sweet at the same time. Remember, don't recommend flavors to the customers, Meg said with a smile as he looked at Yabamiya, who walked into the kitchen. Okay. Yabamiya nodded obediently and didn't question Meg's words. She picked up a tray and brought out 2 bowls of sweet and savory tofu pudding. After putting down the bowl that she had just licked clean, Amy burped. She stuck out her tongue and tried to lick the syrup off her nose, but she couldn't reach it. After a long while, she gave up. She looked up at the customers who were still staring at her, and said seriously, actually, I think both savory and sweet tofu pudding are super delicious. Everyone looked at Amy, who had a sincere expression on her face, and their voices quieted down a little. However, their expressions were still unconvinced. Amy liked both, so even if they voted for each other, it wouldn't affect the debate at all. Also, it's strictly forbidden to make noise in the restaurant. You'll disturb the other customers, so you have to behave yourselves in the restaurant. Amy put down the spoon in her hand and stretched out her small hand. She looked at all of the customers who were looking at her, and a bluish-purple flame suddenly burst forth from her small palm. It suddenly shrank into a fist-sized fireball in her palm. She warned in a serious voice, otherwise, Father will be unhappy, and I'll get angry and set you on fire. You'll be cooked by my fireball. Chapter 166. The appearance of the fireball made the air a little hotter. Ripples appeared in the surrounding air, indicating that the fireball was not as simple as it looked on the surface. If one only looked at Amy's adorable appearance, they would have forgotten that she was the little devil who dared to burn Crassus' beard with a fireball when she was angry and made Sargera surrender. She said that a fireball would be cooked, and no one had to question her. All they had to do was tell her how well done they wanted it. Of course, the most important thing was the rules written at the back of the menu. If they were blacklisted, they would never be able to taste such delicious food again. That was the most worrying thing. The restaurant instantly fell silent. The aroma of beans wafting through the air became richer, intermingled with the sweet aroma of sugar and sauce. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of bowls being placed on the table and Yabamiya's energetic voice. This little one has become a little more dignified. She can maintain order in the restaurant now. Luna looked at Amy with a smile. She flipped through the menu and noticed the rules written at the back. She couldn't help but be surprised. These rules have something in common with Principal Novan's philosophy. If they meet, they might have a good chat. Gulp. The sound of saliva swallowing broke the silence. It was particularly clear in this quiet environment. Everyone turned to look at Haebang and the savory tofu pudding in front of him. They were a little envious of him. You guys continue. I'm going to eat first. Haebang chuckled. He looked at the savory tofu pudding in front of him and picked up the spoon. He was the fourth person to enter the restaurant and received the fourth bowl of tofu pudding. Sweet tofu pudding paired with Shangzhou fried rice is indeed a delicacy unique to this world. Crassus scooped a spoonful of tofu pudding into his mouth and couldn't help but praise. He shook his half-bearded head slightly and narrowed his eyes with a look of enjoyment. Savory tofu pudding paired with rujiamo is the real deal. Julian took a bite of the rujiamo, swallowed it, and then took a bite of the savory tofu pudding. He praised it from the bottom of his heart. His hunchback seemed to straighten a bit, and he enjoyed the blood-boiling feeling brought by the rujiamo. The tofu pudding, on the other hand, gave him a soothing feeling, as if it was replenishing something in his body that he desperately needed. This texture is simply too wonderful. Exactly what method was used to turn the coarse soybeans into such a delicacy that melts in the mouth? A middle-aged man with a pot-bellied belly, who was dressed like a wealthy merchant, took a bite of the sweet tofu, and an expression of surprise appeared on his face. He couldn't help but take another spoonful of the tofu pudding. The sweet syrup mixed with the sweet and refreshing tofu pudding was a delicacy that made one unable to extricate themselves from. Delicious. Haebang's comment was very simple. He didn't want to waste any more time talking about the tofu pudding. The spoon in his hand didn't stop for a moment, and the corners of his mouth curled up involuntarily. He looked very pleased. After being warned by Amy and Yabamiya's quick delivery of the dishes, the crowd was no longer in the mood to argue. They had only argued because they were bored in the line outside. Now that they were in the restaurant, of course, the food was more important. It's not too late to argue after eating. Mr. Mack is such a stickler for rules. It's not easy to be the one who stands out. Everyone had their own plans. The customers who received the tofu pudding began to enjoy the delicacies as they praised the food generously. Meanwhile, the customers who had yet to be served looked toward the kitchen with anticipation in their eyes. The atmosphere in the restaurant had returned to its usual comfortable state. That's very good. Amy put away the fireball in her hand with satisfaction, and patted Ugly Duckling's head. Ugly Duckling nimbly hugged her leg and slid to the ground. She also jumped down from her chair, stood on her tiptoes, and stacked the two bowls on the table together. Then, she hugged the bowls in her arms and walked toward the kitchen. Father, the bowls. Amy entered the door, and raised the bowls in her hands. She was very reliable. Good girl. Meg took the bowls with a smile and put them in the sink. He looked at Amy with admiration. She was a good helper. She successfully maintained order in the restaurant, and didn't make the customers feel uncomfortable. If someone else said the same thing, the effect would be completely different. Can I learn to cook from father? Amy stood on her tiptoes and looked at the rows of bowls on the stove. She looked at Meg expectantly. "Do you really want to learn?" Meg was a little surprised. He looked at Amy. Amy nodded. She looked into Meg's eyes and nodded seriously. "I think Father is very good at cooking. You can make so many people happy. I want to learn too. That way, many people will like Amy." "Silly girl, even if you don't learn to cook, many people will still like you." Meg smiled and reached out to scratch her nose. He gestured from the height of the stove. He was still a little taller than Amy. He shook his head and said, "Although I also want to teach Amy how to cook, I can't do it now. Amy can't even see the pot, so how can you cook? If you really want to learn, then eat and grow. When you're taller than the stove, Father will teach you how to cook." Amy was initially a little disappointed, but hope reignited in her eyes after hearing Meg's words. She walked over to the stove and gestured. She was still about 10 centimeters away. She looked at the stove with a serious expression and said, "Stove, stay here and don't grow any taller. Wait for me to surpass you." Meg shook his head with a smile. How could his daughter be so adorable? Amy stood in the kitchen and watched Meg cook for a while. Then, she carried Ugly Duckling out and sat down on the bar stool behind the counter. "Hello, here's your sweet tofu pudding, and here's your savory tofu pudding." Yabamiya placed 2 bowls of tofu pudding in front of Sally and Luna. The soft tofu pudding trembled slightly, but didn't dissipate in the slightest. Sally and Luna's eyes were drawn to the tofu pudding in front of them. The faint aroma of beans wafted toward them, and the air seemed to have become a little sweeter. The saltiness of the tofu pudding didn't even seem to have been affected by it. Luna picked up her spoon and looked at Sally with a curious expression. She had been wearing a veil since the beginning of the line, so she should be able to remove it now that she was going to eat, right? In the long line, a middle-aged elf was also looking at Sally with a puzzled expression. He narrowed his eyes as if he were thinking about something. "This sweet flavor seems to make me feel better." Sally's eyes were completely drawn to the tofu pudding in front of her. She removed her veil and placed it on her lap. She scooped up a spoonful of the tofu pudding, and her bright eyes were filled with surprise. "What a beautiful elf girl." Luna's eyes were filled with amazement. Chapter 167. Luna quickly retracted her gaze. It was impolite to stare at others while eating. She looked at the tofu pudding in front of her, and scooped up a spoonful expectantly. The spoon felt as if it had cut through water, and there was no resistance at all. The white and tender piece of tofu pudding swayed slightly in the spoon. There was a layer of orange-red sauce on the surface, and the topmost layer was decorated with some pickles and a small shrimp. "It's so cute." Luna's eyes lit up. The small shrimps should be dried. They were stained with a little sauce, but they still looked crystal clear, as if they had just been fished out from the sea. The chopped pickled vegetables were sprinkled on top, exuding a faint salty aroma. Just smelling the aroma made her salivate. "Teacher Luna, the savory tofu pudding is super delicious," Amy said to Luna with Ugly Duckling in her arms with a smile. Luna nodded. She raised her hand in front of her mouth and gracefully put the tofu pudding into her mouth. Her eyes lit up immediately. The slightly salty tofu pudding melted as soon as it entered his mouth. It was softer than the egg wrapped around the Yangzhou fried rice, but it didn't feel like water at all. The tofu pudding slid down his tongue, and the salty taste of the pickled vegetables melted perfectly into his mouth. That tiny shrimp seemed to contain the freshness of the ocean. What kind of feeling was this? It was like stepping on the clouds and then falling into the soft clouds all of a sudden. Like a child, he was laughing and playing wantonly inside. Suddenly, a wave rolled up and gently patted his face, full of refreshment and comfort. Gulp. Luna swallowed it with her eyes still closed. She carefully savored the faint bean aroma flowing between her lips and teeth, and a joyful smile appeared on her face. This taste reminded her of her childhood. Although she was with her children every day and looked at their innocent smiles, it seemed that she hadn't laughed so freely in a long time. I wonder if those childhood friends of mine are doing well now. It's been 3 years. It's time to go home for Peace Memorial Day this year. Luna opened her eyes and scooped another spoonful into her mouth. This time, she didn't cover it with her hand and continued to eat slowly. She sank into her memories and a faint smile hung on her lips. Sally glanced at Luna before looking at the tofu pudding in front of her. It looked like egg custard, but it was more springy than egg custard. She dug into the tofu pudding that was covered by the golden red syrup. The cut was as white as jade, but it was soon covered by the sticky syrup. The tofu pudding that was wrapped in the crystal-clear syrup swayed slightly in the spoon, looking like an exquisite piece of art. It's sweet with a hint of floral fragrance. There really is honey in the syrup. Sally was pleasantly surprised and couldn't help but feed it into her mouth. Like snow that had just fallen in winter, the sweet and tender tofu pudding melted in her mouth, but it was different from the icy coldness of snow. The sweetness of the syrup and the aroma of the beans fused together perfectly, and the syrup that enveloped the tofu pudding was so rich and sweet that her brows immediately relaxed. It did indeed taste like honey, but it was sweeter than honey. It had probably been boiled with sugar. It wasn't as greasy as normal syrup, and it had a hint of honey fragrance. It tasted even better, and it was the taste that she liked. There was 100 Flowers Valley in the Wind Forest. The climate was warm, and the flowers were blooming all year round. There were many bees here, and when she was bored, she liked to search for beehives near the 100 Flowers Valley. The honey from the 100 Flowers Valley was sweeter and more delicious than the honey from other places. Princess Irina was the one who taught her how to raid beehives. At the time, she was still young and often followed the princess around. In her eyes, the princess was omnipotent. She was the prettiest and the most proficient in magic. She would take them to raid beehives to get delicious honey and steal the spirit fruits that the elders planted. Later, she was going to go to Rodu with a delegation, and before she left, she told them that she wanted to leave something on the most famous Magus Tower on the continent. No one believed her, and when the princess returned, she was grounded by the queen for half a month, saying that she had written a line of words on the Magus Tower. However, this became a feat in everyone's hearts. Although the Magus Tower was in Rodu, it was a place that all magic casters on the Norland continent yearned to visit. Even the elven magic casters had to admit that, but the princess really did leave a line on it. A few years later, the princess left home with a dozen or so dragon coins, and left a letter. She left for more than a decade, and the elven race would receive news about her from time to time. Sometimes she would appear in the twilight forest of the orcs, sometimes on the Demon Islands, and in a few months on Giant Dragon Island. Her footprints were all over the continent, and she became the idol of the younger generation of the elven race. Sally also admired her a lot. She felt that she had lived a life of freedom and the way life should be. Her proud appearance was enviable. Until 3 years ago, she came back. It seemed that the queen had brought her back in person. After that, she stayed in the cave where the holy tree was, and never showed her face. No one knew what had happened. Apart from her maid, Phyrus, she didn't see anyone. It was as if she had become a different person. Of course, there were many times in the past when she was alone with the holy tree. Ever since she was born, she was the only one in the entire elven race who was close to the holy tree. Sally hadn't seen her in a long time. She had left home because she was forced to get married, and she had only brought a dozen dragon coins with her. She wanted to emulate Sally's heroism, so she left all the jewelry she had on her, which could have been exchanged for countless gold coins, in her dressing table before leaving the house. She didn't think that she had overestimated her ability. She had only just arrived at Chaos City, and she already had to struggle for days just to have a good meal. The princess definitely wouldn't have been so cowardly in the past. However, could it be that 100-flower honey was added here as well? Why does it taste so familiar? Sally shook her head to get rid of the messy thoughts in her head. She tasted it carefully for a while, and a puzzled look appeared on her face. It tasted a little like the honey she had eaten in the 100-flower valley, but she was 100% sure that no human could go there to collect honey. Other than her, few elves would do such a thing, let alone collect honey and sell it. Maybe it's 100-flower honey from other places. The owner is very careful with the ingredients. The ingredients are very special, and they have some special effects. Sally scooped another spoonful, and tasted it carefully. The sweet and wonderful taste made her feel happy. The happiest time since she left home was when she had a plate of Yangzhou fried rice in this restaurant, and today. Food was indeed the easiest thing to make people happy. Beautiful big sister elf, isn't the sweet tofu pudding delicious? Amy's voice sounded, and she asked with a smile. Sally turned to look at her, and she suddenly faltered slightly at the sight of the smile on her face. In her daze, she suddenly realized why she felt a sense of familiarity toward Amy. Amy wasn't a little girl from the elven tribe. She was Princess Irina when she was young, and she was just as black-tongued and liked to give others nicknames. At that time, she also had a special nickname, Slug. I'm also a beautiful little fairy. She has been working very hard to update her novel. She spends more than 12 hours in front of the computer every day, trying to write a story that satisfies her and everyone else's expectations. Although it seems like she has been writing tofu pudding all this time, she is actually interspersing the plot, foreshadowing, and story. It may seem slow, but I believe that it will bring a different feeling to everyone once it is released. Here, I have 2 requests. First, please support legitimate subscriptions. Only Qidian and QQ Reading are legitimate websites. Qingyu is a full-time author, and your subscriptions are my meal money. If you tip me, I'll add a drumstick. So, subscriptions are really, really, really important. Chapter 168. Father, when did such a beautiful restaurant open here? Outside the restaurant, Palmer looked at the restaurant with surprise. He remembered that he had been to this corner the last time he came to the Aiden Square, but he didn't remember seeing such a restaurant. Big sister. Good food. Parber, who was standing at the side, was stunned for 3 seconds. He clapped his little hands and walked toward the glass window. He was about to step in when his little head bumped into the glass, and he took 2 steps back. He raised his little hand and looked at the glass window, completely stunned. It was as if he had encountered something that he couldn't understand. Ouch! Parber, are you all right? George hurriedly walked over and squatted down. He was a little worried, but he also couldn't help but want to laugh. This little guy was so adorable. Why did he bump into the glass? The customers sitting next to the window were also startled by the loud thud. After seeing that it was an adorable little boy who had bumped into the glass, they couldn't help but laugh. His adorable look was still very adorable. Father. Father, the air is blocked. Parber gestured with his hands, completely unable to understand. It's not the air that's blocked. It's a transparent crystal, a very large transparent crystal. George didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This little guy had never seen such a large crystal before. Furthermore, children had limited vision. He took Parber's little hand 2 steps forward, and gently pressed it against the crystal. He smiled, and explained, "Do you feel it?" This is a crystal. It's completely transparent, so we can see the people inside, and they can also see us. Parber touched the cool glass, and patted it twice. He nodded happily, and said, "Crystal. Crystal. Big sister. Looks like our little Parber already wants to eat good food and play with Big Sister." Harrison smiled as he patted Parber's shoulder, and said, "Then what about our little prince of arithmetic, Parmer? Are you also looking forward to meeting our adorable little sister?" "If she really is an adorable little sister, I don't mind teaching her arithmetic," Parmer said coolly with his arms crossed in front of his chest. "Very good. Keep up that cool feeling. A confident man is the most charming." Harrison nodded in satisfaction and patted him on the shoulder. "Let's go in and line up. Mr. Mac's business is really getting better and better. With Mr. Mac's culinary skills, it's hard for his business not to be good. I guess we'll have to eat outside in the future." George held Parber's hand, and followed him into the restaurant. Is there a new dish?" As soon as he entered the restaurant, George's eyes lit up. The aroma of peas was competing with the aroma of Ruggiemo in the air. Almost every customer had a white porcelain bowl in front of them, in which there was a piece of white and tender food drizzled with golden red syrup or salted vegetables and dried shrimps in the golden red sauce. "These dishes weren't there yesterday." "Bro, what's this?" Harrison asked a young man sitting by the door curiously as soon as he entered. He was very familiar with the place. "Mr. Mac's new dish, tofu pudding, is amazing. I highly recommend the salty one," the young man said, giving Harrison a thumbs up. "Don't listen to him. Sweet is the way to go. I've seen the true meaning of life," the young man sitting across from him said with an intoxicated look. "You two are lucky. Looks like we're going to have a good meal tonight." Harrison didn't participate in their argument. Instead, he walked to the back of the line with Parmer. After entering the restaurant, Parmer's eyes were attracted by the murals on the walls. The majestic Rodu, the magnificent Dragon Island, the fairyland like the Wind Forest. There were also knights on horseback, dragons flying in the sky, and magic casters chanting spells. Everything was so new, as if a whole new world was unfolding in front of him. Rainbow fried rice. Big sister. Parmer clapped his little hands and looked around as if he were looking for something. The two cute children attracted a lot of attention when they came in. Because of many of the regular customers were more tolerant and fond of the children, especially the little boy with the mushroom hairstyle. His expression and actions were adorable, and he was even muttering, "Big sister." He looked too cute. "Big sister. Big sister. Where are you?" Parmer's eyes quickly fell on Amy behind the counter. He was dazed for a moment before his eyes lit up, and he clapped his little hands happily. Parmer also looked over expectantly. He tried his best to control his cool expression, but when his eyes fell on Amy, he was taken aback. Then, his eyes widened, and he exclaimed, "Why are you here? Why are you here? This is my family's restaurant, so I'm here." Amy was also a little surprised to see Parmer, but her expression was much calmer than his. She nodded with a serious expression. "But, why is this your family's restaurant?" Parmer still found it hard to accept. Amy thought seriously for a moment before replying, "I'm not sure. Maybe it's because my father is the owner of this restaurant." This explanation. Parmer felt like his IQ had been severely damaged. He looked at Amy and swallowed to force himself to calm down. The fear of being dominated by her in class that day had mostly dissipated after playing at the racecourse for the whole day. Now that he saw Amy, he suddenly felt a little nervous. "Ha! You two know each other?" George and Harrison exclaimed almost at the same time. They had wanted to bring the children here to eat some good food and make friends. They didn't expect the two children to already know each other. "She's the student who transferred in," Palmer said with a complicated expression as he looked at Amy. George and Harrison's expressions became a little strange. 2 days ago, Palmer was completely thrashed by a transfer student in arithmetic. He was so traumatized that he went home to study in seclusion. Today, they had specially brought him out to relax, but they didn't expect to bump into the muzzle of a gun. They thought about how Palmer had seriously said that he was going to teach the little girl arithmetic. They wanted to laugh, but they had to force it back. This time, they had really screwed their son over. "So this kid is George's son. No wonder I thought he looked a little familiar. But the difference in their sizes is a little too big. It's hard to recognize them standing together." Meg also took a glance at Palmer. He still remembered him, but he didn't think that he would be the eldest son that George had been talking about all this time. That adorable mushroom-head kid beside him should be the second son. Palmer waddled to the counter, opened his little arms, and said in a baby voice, "Big sister, I want a hug." Chapter 169. Palmer was immediately rooted to the spot. He looked up at Amy with his little mouth agape, and his little brain seemed to be unable to comprehend what Amy was saying. All of the customers couldn't help but burst into laughter upon seeing this. Both of them were very adorable, and their conversation was even more adorable. However, Amy was still as sharp-tongued as ever, even to children. This little girl. Meg couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. Amy was only 4 years old, and was only about 5 centimeters taller than the mushroom head. She would often wobble when she carried Ugly Duckling in her arms, so it was clearly a little difficult for her to carry the little mushroom head. However, the truth was a little hurtful. Big sister, I don't want to carry you." Palmer only came to his senses after a short while. He turned to George with an aggrieved expression, and pursed his lips as if he were about to cry. George looked at Palmer, and his mouth gaped open, but he didn't know what to say. It seemed that he had dragged both of his sons into this mess. Did we underestimate Amy's ability to influence children? Harrison asked in a quiet voice. Perhaps. George nodded in agreement. However, it wasn't appropriate for him to chime in at this moment. "How can you say that about Palmer?" Palmer stepped forward and shielded Palmer behind him as he glowered at Amy with an enraged expression. "Big brother." Palmer shrunk behind him with an aggrieved expression. "If you want to carry him, I won't stop you." Amy looked at Palmer with a nonchalant shrug. Palmer's expression stiffened upon hearing this. He didn't think that Amy would respond in such a manner. He slowly turned to look at Palmer. "Big brother, carry me, carry me." Palmer also looked at him with glowing eyes. He spread open his arms, and an excited expression appeared on his little face again. All of the customers nearby also turned to Palmer. They were in awe of Amy's quick-witted response, but they were also curious as to how Palmer, who was slightly older than both Amy and Palmer, was going to respond. Palmer was wearing a brand new riding suit. Even though he wasn't very old, he already looked like a handsome little prince. He had most likely inherited his mother's looks. Aside from the fact that he didn't resemble George at all, he was a handsome little brother. If he could carry his little brother and comfort him, that would be even better. "Palmer, be good. I'll hug you next time." Palmer looked at Palmer, who was about to pounce on him, and pressed his hand against Palmer's forehead as he said with a complicated expression, "You've really gained weight recently." Palmer's forehead was pressed down and he couldn't move forward anymore. He looked up at Palmer and became even more aggrieved. He pouted and said, "Big brother, you didn't hug me either, and you said I was fat. You're worse than the big sister." Pfft. A girl sitting at a nearby table burst into laughter. Thankfully, she didn't have anything in her mouth, so she couldn't stop giggling at the sight of the three little guys. Parmer blushed. He had come to support Parber, but he didn't expect to be the one being disliked. He felt a little wronged, but Parber really had gotten fatter recently. In the past, he could carry him on his back, but now, he could jump on top of him and press him down. Amy looked at the wronged Parber, and turned to Parmer with a serious expression. How can you say that about Mushroom Head? He's only 3 years old. How can he bear the word fat? Parmer opened his mouth. What he had said didn't seem to be any different from what Amy had said. Why was he being criticized now? However, he also felt a little apologetic at the sight of Parber's tears. He patted Parber's head, and nodded with a serious expression. Good boy, Parber. It's all my fault. Eat more and grow taller and stronger. Then I'll be able to carry you in the future. Parber immediately became obedient after being patted on the head. A smile reappeared on his little face, and he nodded happily. You're both good children now. Amy nodded with a gratified expression. Parmer and Parber turned to look at Amy at the same time. Something didn't seem right. Why was she speaking in such an old-fashioned manner? Weren't they all children? Amy looked at the two of them with a serious expression and said, Go and line up. You're not allowed to make too much noise in the restaurant, and you're not allowed to run around. If you disturb the other customers, you'll be spanked. Spanked? A panicked expression appeared on Parber's face. He looked around as if he was looking for someone. Parmer clenched his fists and said stubbornly, I'm a man, and I won't accept this kind of punishment. I'll get Uncle Blue Fatty to catch you. Amy looked at George. Father. Parmer raised an eyebrow, and turned to look at George. He wanted to get support from him. Parmer, little boss is talking about basic dining etiquette. Have you forgotten it? If you and Parber do such impolite things in the restaurant, I'll really catch you and spank you. George looked at Parmer and Parber with a serious expression, and then turned to Amy with a benevolent smile. His daughter was indeed the cutest. Parmer and Parber looked at each other, and suddenly felt a sense of danger. Their father was being so serious with them, but he was smiling so kindly with Amy. This didn't seem to be a good situation. Big sister, I like big sisters, Parber said to Amy. But I like little sisters. Amy spread her hands open, and replied with an honest expression. Wah, big sisters don't like me. I want to become a little sister. Big sisters will only like me if I become a little sister. Parber finally burst into tears. You're already 3 years old. You have to learn to be strong. You can't cry all day, Amy lectured with a serious expression. Parber's crying and tears immediately stopped. Tears were still welling up in his eyes, but he still wore an aggrieved expression. Parber, let's go. Don't embarrass yourself. Parmer reached out to hold Parber's little hand. This is probably the legendary teenage boy killer. Not a single one of them is worthy of fighting. Harrison sighed. He nudged George with his elbow, and smiled as he said, Looks like your childhood sweetheart plan has completely failed. It can only be said that Mr. Mac's realm is too high, and his daughter is too smart. George nodded with a wry smile, but a look of longing soon appeared in his eyes. He smiled and said, When I have a daughter in the future, I'm going to teach her the same thing. I'm going to break all the legs of those who dare to get close to her. They're asking for death if they want to get close to my little princess. Meow. Ugly Duckling had woken up at some point, and it poked its head out to take a look at Parber. An orange kitten. Parber's aggrieved expression immediately lit up, and he made his way over with curiosity. He looked up at Amy, and begged, Big sister, little kitten, please hug me. There's no way she'll let you hug the kitten, Parmer said with certainty. All of the customers were also looking at Amy. This kitten named Ugly Duckling had never been hugged by anyone before. The mushroom-headed kid was probably going to be sad again. Amy looked at the tear-stained Parber, and hesitated momentarily before handing Ugly Duckling over as she said, "Here, take it, but you have to be careful. Ugly Duckling has gained weight recently. I'm just a little kitten. Why do I have to bear the word fat?" Ugly Duckling glared at Amy with an unwilling expression. Chapter 170. Fat Kitten. Parber nodded as he raised his arms to pick up Ugly Duckling. Everyone was rather surprised that Amy didn't mock him. Instead, she really did hand Ugly Duckling over to Parber, and she seemed like a caring little sister. Everyone's impression of Amy was completely overturned. They looked at Parber, who carefully took the little orange kitten, and then at the calm and collected Amy. This little girl was quite kind sometimes. As expected, my little girl is super obedient and kind. That's enough. Meg had been a little worried that Amy would get along with other children, but a smile also appeared on his face upon seeing this. He had been worried that Amy wouldn't have any friends after getting used to her sharp tongue, but that didn't seem to be a problem at all. She knew her limits. It's been going on since class. Looks like Palmer still cares about losing to me in arithmetic. What a competitive little guy. Luna had seen Parber as soon as he walked in. She took a look at Parber, who was holding Ugly Duckling, and then at Amy, and her smile widened. That's right. This is the adorable and kind little guy. He used to have to share a pancake with the other children. Looks like there's no problem now. Little boss is still very kind. George was just about to go over to Parber to comfort him, but he suddenly stopped in his tracks with a smile on his face. How is that possible? Parber's eyes widened. He had been completely speechless ever since he walked in, and Amy really did hand the kitten over to Parber. He looked at Parber, who was carefully holding the kitten in his arms, and blushed even harder. He had just made a solemn vow, only to be slapped in the face again in the blink of an eye. Meow! Ugly Duckling let out a displeased cry in Parber's arms, and shook its head as it tried to stand up. Don't move, Ugly Duckling, Amy warned as she looked at Parber, who was swaying left and right in Parber's arms. Ugly Duckling immediately cowered in the face of Amy's stern gaze. It lay down obediently and stared blankly at the ceiling. It's really like that. It's the same for the left hand. It's all faded. The color has become lighter. At this moment, the woman who had exclaimed earlier exclaimed in surprise again. She rolled up her sleeves and blushed. Everyone turned to look at her. The woman looked to be in her 30s. Her appearance and figure were ordinary. She wore a purple-green dress with an emerald necklace around her neck. Her long brown hair was tied up. Judging from her appearance, she should be a madam from a rich family. At this moment, she was looking at her hands with a face full of surprise. Her rolled-up sleeves revealed a pair of forearms. On her fair and tender arms, there were 2 shocking burn scars. Her skin was wrinkled together and looked a little scary. However, she did not have the slightest intention of avoiding everyone's gaze. Big Sister Roxia, has it really faded? The woman sitting opposite her asked in surprise. Yes. I've been looking at it every day, and I know every change clearly. When I was eating just now, I felt a little cold on my arm. I didn't pay much attention to it at first, but when I took a peek, the scar actually faded a little. The area around it also shrank a little, and it returned to its normal color. Roxia nodded vigorously. She could not hide the surprise on her face. Roxia was from a big family in Chaos City. When she was young, she was accidentally scalded by a copper stove. Apart from her arms, she also had a burn on her chest. Although the marriage was for the sake of her family, she loved her husband very much. Her husband was also very considerate to her. However, because of the scar, she was always worried that her husband would get tired of her ugly body one day and throw himself into the arms of another woman. Therefore, she had been looking for a way to remove the scar all these years. However, no matter whether it was magic or medical skills, they could only make the scar look fainter. There was no way to completely remove and heal it. After going back and forth, she was already a little discouraged. Today, she was also invited out for dinner by her good friend, who said that she would bring her to taste the most delicious food in the world. She did not expect the tofu pudding to be so delicious. Of course, what was more surprising was that the scar that had not healed for a long time faded and shrank after eating it. She was really surprised and happy. Sally, Luna, and Roxia were sitting at the same table. They all looked at her in surprise. The tofu pudding was already so delicious. If it could also remove scars and beautify them, it would be the favorite of all girls who love to look beautiful. It's really effective. Luna raised her left hand and looked at it. Her eyes widened. The day before yesterday, when she was cutting vegetables, she accidentally cut a small wound on her left index finger. The wound wasn't big, and it quickly formed a scab. But now, the scab had automatically fallen off, and the wound had completely disappeared. Her skin was smooth and delicate. It was hard to believe that there was a wound on her finger that was healing just before she entered the house. Does the tofu pudding have the effect of removing scars? My skin seems to be better, too. Even my old face has become tender. That's amazing. I think most of the customers in Mr. Mac's restaurant will be female in the future. It's true. Half of the scar that I got when I was 3 years old has disappeared. Everyone was talking about it. Many people even found the scars on their own bodies, proving the effect again. The atmosphere in the restaurant became lively all of a sudden. If it really works, I'll bring my wife here tomorrow. She's been talking about the scar on her hand for years. George's eyes lit up. Mr. Mac is really a genius. The Yangzhou fried rice that relieves fatigue, the rujiamo that unclogs tendons, the tofu pudding that removes scars and beautifies them, and the most important thing is that every dish is so delicious. With such skills, he can change the restaurant into Mamie Clinic. In the future, customers don't even need to order food. They can just ask about the situation and prescribe the medicine directly. Harrison nodded with a smile. There was a hint of ridicule in his words, but more than that, he was full of admiration. After a pause, he exclaimed, "He's as good as the king of medicine." What? The tofu pudding can remove scars? In the corner, a middle-aged hero with a stubble was taken aback when he heard that. He panicked immediately, and stood up abruptly. He tore open his shirt, revealing his muscular chest. There were countless new and old scars of various sizes intersecting on it. There was even a scar that cut diagonally across the chest, recording one thrilling battle after another. Countless experiences of brushing shoulders with the god of death were like badges, the greatest pride of the brave. Chapter 171. Don't worry, Joel. Your scars are still there, the man who came with the hero comforted him with a smile. Still there, my ass. The wound on my chest from the first time I went hunting 25 years ago is gone. The wound on my chest from the orc's fang from 20 years ago is also gone. Anne. Joel counted the number of scars that had disappeared, and he wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Don't worry, brother. You'll get more scars in the future. The friend patted Joel's shoulder to comfort him. That's completely different. How can I scare those bastards if I don't have time to recover? Joel still looked as if he was unwilling to accept reality. Although he had already become the vice leader of an adventure team, his habit of bragging had never changed. He had always treated these scars as badges to show off and brag to the newbie adventurers. Now that he had lost a few of them, he would have nothing to brag about in the future. There was nothing left for him to brag about in this world. If another bowl of savory tofu pudding was placed in front of you, would you eat it? His friend asked with a smile. Joel looked at him and fell silent for a moment before nodding decisively. Yes. Not only are my scars gone, even my birthmark has faded. Can you take a look for me? Have the pockmarks on my face faded as well? Soon, aside from the scars, the customers were pleasantly surprised to discover that some of the problems with their skin had been alleviated to a certain extent after eating the tofu pudding. Yabamiya, who had just put down 2 bowls of soup, raised her hand to take a look, and her eyes lit up. She had a rujiamo and a bowl of sweet tofu pudding for dinner, and she was in a hurry to open for business after that, so she didn't notice the changes on her hands. Her hands were full of scars and calluses, and some of the scars from many years ago had disappeared. When he was 7 years old, he was scalded by a red-hot iron pot. When he was 8 years old, he was bitten by an old dog in the kitchen. Those ugly scars that were difficult to get rid of had obviously faded a lot. The dead skin had turned pink, and his skin had become smooth again. What an amazing effect! In that case, as long as I continue to eat tofu pudding, I'll be able to recover my hands like them one day. Yabamiya looked at her scarred hands, and she suddenly became excited. In the past, Yabamiya felt that her life was lowly, and that she could only do the most menial and arduous tasks in the dark kitchen for the rest of her life. She earned the lowest wage, and her self-esteem was trampled on by everyone. Her hands were nothing. However, in Mamie Restaurant, she felt warmth and respect that she had never felt before. She slowly found a new life goal and the state that she should live in. Which 18-year-old girl didn't want to be beautiful? She was no longer that pitiful girl who could only hide in the kitchen. However, every time a customer's eyes on her hands, and she felt as if they were needles stabbing into her heart. She also wanted to become better. She wanted to have a normal pair of hands so that she could live up to Boss Mag's trust and bring a better dining experience to the customers. As long as I eat 2 servings of tofu pudding every day, the scars and calluses on my hands will disappear sooner or later. Yabamiya clenched her fists and muttered to herself. She picked up the tray and walked briskly into the kitchen. Her wish had finally come true, and it was all thanks to Meg. Didn't you say it's a beauty treatment? This is fucking plastic surgery. Meg was also shocked by the customers' reactions. Although the system had told him that the tofu pudding had a beauty effect, he had only thought that it would be a supplement of collagen. He didn't expect the effects to be so strong. System. Why didn't you tell me earlier that the effects were so good? If you had told me earlier, I would have set the price at 2,000 copper coins. Meg was a little speechless. The effects of the tofu pudding were a lifesaver for people who suffered from scars, pockmarks, birthmarks, and other skin problems. Even if the price was 10 times higher, there was no need to worry that no one would buy it. The system also didn't expect the effects to be so strong. Although we didn't do any animal experiments, the test results showed that the protein content was 4.5 times higher than normal. It seems that there is an unknown trace element that has a strong beauty effect, the system said after a moment of silence. I say, the food you're providing us with, don't tell me you didn't even do animal experiments. Meg raised his eyebrows as he suddenly realized something. This time, the system was silent for a long time. After a while, it said, the ingredients provided by the system have all gone through 18 rounds of precise tests. After a large amount of data analysis, the ingredients are confirmed to be harmless to the body. Only then will they be provided to the restaurant. They are guaranteed to be non-toxic and pollution-free. So, you still didn't do animal experiments? Meg asked again. Host, please don't be too concerned about animal experiments. The results of the system's precise tests combined with the large amount of data analysis are more intuitive and scientific than animal experiments. There is no need to take into account the various incidences of the animal survival. As long as there are enough samples, the results obtained are more than 10 times more accurate than animal experiments in the current world. The system's serious voice sounded. After a pause, it said, "The host is the first person to receive these ingredients. So, you can collect data from us for animal experiments." Meg pursed his lips, but he was already more or less convinced by the system's words. After all, he was a science and engineering student, and had come into contact with large amounts of data in the past. The system claimed to have grasped 80% of the knowledge. Using its database to test the usability of ingredients was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. However, this also reminded Meg that the system had previously said that he couldn't eat too much tofu pudding. It seemed that the restriction was not only for the sake of the customer's safety, but also for the sake of the customer's safety. "I want another helping of sweet tofu pudding." When Yabamiya walked over, Crassus gently put down his spoon and looked at her with a smile. "I want another helping of savory tofu pudding as well." Julian also put down his spoon and said in a hoarse voice. The chatter in the restaurant gradually died down, and everyone's eyes fell on Yabamiya. On the menu, it was stated that each person could only buy one helping of tofu pudding. Many people had already finished their portions, but no one would mind eating another bowl of such delicious food. As for the customers who had been dissatisfied with their looks, they suddenly saw a glimmer of hope. They looked at Yabamiya and the kitchen expectantly. Not to mention one bowl, they were willing to eat 10 bowls of tofu pudding. Chapter 172. But Yabamiya looked a bit flustered under the gazes of the customers, especially Crassus and Julian, two powerful magic casters who were also Amy's teachers. Should he refuse their requests according to the rules set on the menu, or should he accept them reasonably? The boss won't refuse their requests, will he? That's right. They are little boss's teachers. It would be unreasonable to reject such a relationship. If they ask for a second helping, we can have it too, right? We are all customers, after all. The customers discussed in low voices, waiting for Yabamiya's response. They were all sure that Meg wouldn't refuse Julian and Crassus' requests, and they were all thinking about how to persuade Meg to give them another helping of tofu pudding. It would be a torture if they could only have one helping of this delicious tofu pudding. "Do you want another helping?" A hesitant expression appeared on Sally's face again as she looked at the empty bowl before her. There was still a faint fragrance of beans lingering in her mouth, and a sweet sensation enveloped her entire body. Even the air that she exhaled seemed to carry the fragrance of 100-flower honey. "Sorry, each person can only have one helping of tofu pudding per meal, and no takeout service." Just then, Meg's voice sounded. He came out with a plate of Yangzhou fried rice and put it in front of Crassus. "Your Yangzhou fried rice," he said with a smile. He refused. The restaurant quieted down immediately. The customers looked at Meg with surprise and disappointment. Although Meg was smiling, it was only a polite smile, and he didn't intend to compromise at all. Crassus was also stunned. He looked at the plate of Yangzhou fried rice in front of him, and then looked at the smiling Meg. This morning, Meg let them try it for free. Now that he was Amy's teacher and didn't refuse to pay, how could Meg refuse his request for another helping? "Mr. Mack, I will also pay for the second helping." Crassus tried to communicate again. The tofu pudding was so delicious, and the sweetness was addictive. It was absolutely irresistible for people who liked sweets. Julian raised his eyebrows and looked at Meg. Knowing his identity, Meg was the first person who dared to refuse his request. Although he was Amy's father, wasn't it too unreasonable? Each person can only have one helping per meal. It's written on the menu. That's the restaurant's rules. I hope everyone can follow them and enjoy the meal. Meg shook his head with a smile. Looking at the disappointed customers, Crassus and Julian, who didn't look too happy, and cursed in his heart. He knew that once the limit was announced, many customers who still wanted more would be unhappy. However, the tofu pudding was too nutritious, and a normal person could eat about the same amount. It wouldn't be good to eat too much of it, and it would ruin the restaurant's reputation. Besides, he had already accepted the mission of the system. Although he hadn't reached a consensus with the system about the number and content of the boxes on the roulette wheel, he was very tempted by all the rewards. Amy leaned on the counter and looked at Julian and Crassus with vigilance. Father said one helping, so it's one helping. Master, do you want to beat him up? Crassus took a bite of the Yangzhou fried rice and nodded with a smile. Of course not. Mr. Mack said the rules, so of course we have to follow them. Nothing can be accomplished without rules. The Yangzhou fried rice is delicious. Rujiamo is also delicious. Julian picked up a rujiamo and took a bite. Crassus and Yuri realized that it was probably impossible for them to eat another bowl of tofu pudding today. What could they do? They couldn't beat up their beloved disciple's father in front of her, could they? If they were in another restaurant, as long as they showed their identities, the owner would be so scared that he would cook for them as many dishes as they wanted. However, Mag was a little different. He was calm and collected when he didn't know their identities, but after learning that they were great magic casters, his expression was still the same. It was as if he was treating them as ordinary guests because he had the same expression when he received other guests. However, with such an attitude, the restaurant will probably be recognized by more people, right? Forget it, I'll eat it tomorrow. Crassus glanced at Meg and lowered his head to focus on eating the Yangzhou fried rice. Boss, I'll pay 10 times the price. Please sell me another helping. I really need it. Rosia stood up and looked at Meg earnestly. During this period, she had noticed that her husband's attitude towards her had become colder. Her woman's intuition made her feel a sense of crisis, but she couldn't ask. She had been anxious to seek treatment, but she had found a way to get rid of the scar in this restaurant. She didn't care how much money she had to spend. Sorry, the tofu pudding will be served as usual tomorrow morning. You can come earlier. Meg still smiled and shook his head. He couldn't help but say in his mind, System, why don't you evaluate it again? 10 times. Selling one helping is equivalent to selling 10 helping of tofu pudding. I'd be a fool if I didn't make money. Host, please pay attention to your words. Casually insulting the system may trigger a new hidden task. The system's dissatisfied voice sounded, and then it said with some passion, as a candidate for the god of cookery, please take your identity seriously. Don't be swayed by 2,000 copper coins. Changing the rules will ruin the restaurant's rules. A bright future await you. Go for the goal of becoming the top god of cookery. System, do you want 2,000 copper coins? Meg asked seriously. Host, if you have any orders, please tell me. The system's voice immediately softened. Nothing, I just asked casually. Meg curled his lips. The system was really unprincipled. But Roxia still wanted to add more conditions. Madam, I wish you a happy meal. Meg nodded with a smile and turned directly into the kitchen to continue cooking. He had no intention of negotiating, let alone compromising. Roxia opened her mouth. For the first time, she realized that money couldn't solve all problems. It couldn't even break the restaurant's rules. Roxia, forget it. Let's come back tomorrow morning. The 2 people who were rejected just now were archmages. Roxia's best friend reached out to hold Roxia's hand and said softly, "Archmages." Roxia's eyes widened. She was born in a big family, so she naturally knew what those words meant. Meg had even rejected the two great magic casters' requests, so what was hers? She hesitated for a while, and sat down again. It seemed like she could only come back tomorrow. Even archmages can't break the rules. Mr. Mac is really a man of character and principles. Yes, I'll definitely be tempted if I pay 10 times the price. Alas, it seems that I have to bear with it today. Come earlier tomorrow morning. Chapter 173. It is indeed Miss Sally. According to the intelligence, she might have passed by Chaos City half a month ago. The search network in Chaos City has been removed long ago. I didn't expect to meet her here. Fikar sat down in a corner and secretly looked at Sally. The news that Miss Sally had run away from home had spread to Chaos City half a month ago. As one of the most powerful families in the elven race, it was a big deal for a talented young lady to run away from home. And because of Lady Helena's proposal to become the next queen, this noble lady, who had been overshadowed by Princess Irina, had become one of the most popular people in the elven race again. But at this time, Sally had run away from home, and was heading south, just like the princess she had been many years ago. This news had been covered up in the elven race, but those who had been ordered to search for Sally naturally knew about it. Apart from the official position, the reward for finding Sally was also amazing. Fikar could already feel his heart pounding. Perhaps he could be transferred back to the Wind Forest from Chaos City soon. He scooped up a spoonful of sweet tofu pudding and put it into his mouth. Savoring the taste spreading in his mouth, Fikar nodded with satisfaction. People who chased after good food were always lucky. "Mr. Mac, the bill," Crassus said with a smile as he stood up and walked to the kitchen. "That's 8 gold coins in total." Meg nodded with a smile. He was grateful that Crassus and Julian didn't give him a hard time because of their age and power. Otherwise, it would be a bit troublesome. "I've found the magic room. It's in the Magic Academy of Chaos School, on the 3rd floor of the 3rd building. You can send Amy here at 6:30 tomorrow morning." Crassus wasn't in a hurry to take out the money. He smiled and said, "Bring me a plate of Yangzhou fried rice and a plate of sweet tofu pudding on your way here. I won't take them out. You can deliver them, right?" Chaos School. Meg was a bit surprised. He didn't expect Crassus to choose Chaos School. This way, Amy could play with other children after school. But after hearing what Crassus said, his expression became a bit strange. Could this be the origin of Otherworld takeout? Meg raised his eyebrows and hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take the 16 gold coins from Crassus. It was only right for him to respect his teachers. Amy could rely on Crassus and Julian to be a little mischievous, but if he were to follow suit, then he would be a little confused. "Thank you for taking care of Amy in the future." Meg nodded seriously. Crassus, who was ready to argue with Meg, was stunned when he saw Meg take the money and address him respectfully. He looked at Meg in a different light and nodded with a smile. "Okay, she is my only apprentice." A smile appeared on Meg's face. These words were worth more than 1,000,000 promises. After Crassus left, Julian settled the bill with Amy and also got up to leave. After tasting the delicious tofu pudding, the supporters of sweet and savory tofu pudding became even more determined. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder, and it was as if the slightest provocation would cause an explosion. Luna and Sally put down their spoons almost at the same time and heaved a sigh of relief. They had never tasted such delicious food in their lives. Given their backgrounds, there were many more expensive and luxurious banquets, but none of them could compare to this tofu pudding. They were both convinced that they had the best tofu pudding, while the other parties was nothing compared to theirs. The atmosphere was a little tense. However, their good upbringing allowed them to control themselves, and they settled the bill and left one after another. Amy, be a good girl and listen to your father. Luna stood up and patted Amy's head. She then turned to Palmer with a smile, and said, Palmer, you've already done very well. You're recognized as a math prodigy, so don't be discouraged. A man should become more courageous in the face of setbacks. I know, Teacher Luna. Palmer nodded with a serious expression, and his eyes were filled with fighting spirit again. Come again next time, Teacher Luna. Father will cook a lot of delicious food. There'll definitely be more delicious food in the future. Amy looked at Luna with a reluctant expression. I'll be back. Luna nodded with a smile. There was also a hint of anticipation in her eyes. Is there a lot of delicious food? All of the customers looked up. The 3 dishes had already given them an unprecedented taste of food. Could it be that Mr. Mac was going to make even more delicious food? Everyone was skeptical, but more of them were looking forward to it. Palmer played with Ugly Duckling for a while, but he was too weak to hold it, so he had to give it back to Amy. Soon, Harrison and the others also arrived. Harrison, George, and Palmer all ordered the sweet tofu pudding, but Palmer stubbornly ordered the savory tofu pudding with a rugiamo. The more he ate, the happier he became. Even his melancholy couldn't hide the smile on his face. Bye-bye, Uncle Mushroom Head, Uncle Blue Fatty, and Uncle Gray Fatty. Amy stood at the door with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and waved at them. Bye-bye, Big Sister, Fat Kitty. Palmer waved his hand, and reluctantly looked away from Ugly Duckling. He took George's hand and turned around. Bye-bye, little boss. George and Harrison also smiled. George was holding a box of Yangzhou fried rice in his hand. Why didn't you say goodbye to me? Palmer stopped and looked at Amy with a displeased expression. Because I haven't decided what to call you yet, Amy replied seriously. Bye-bye. Palmer was taken aback, and then turned to leave in a huff. Bye-bye. Amy nodded and also turned to enter the restaurant. She seemed to be in a good mood. At the table by the door, Keel looked around, and asked, Boss, they're all eating that tofu pudding. Should we order some too? Why are we working so hard to make money? Sargeras asked them. For Rugiamo. Keel and Mond yelled almost out of reflex. Let's eat. Sargeras waved his hand and pointed at the 15 Rugiamos on the table. The busy night lasted until 9 o'clock. When it was time, Meg smiled and turned away the customers who came later. He closed the door and let out a long sigh of relief. The battle between the salty and the sweet in this world had come to an end. It was indeed more brutal than he had imagined. Father, we sold 512 Rugiamos, 90 rainbow fried rice, and 240 tofu pudding today. Our income is 175,480 copper coins. I converted the dragon coins and gold coins into copper coins. Amy ran over happily with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Her little face was full of praise. Meg hugged her with a smile, and kissed her on the head. You're getting better and better at math, Amy. You're so good at it. You're a prodigy at math, right? He was not stingy with his compliments. Chapter 174. Yabamiya looked at the father and daughter sitting at the door with a smile on her face, but there was a hint of envy in her eyes. She quietly put away the plates on the table and walked towards the kitchen, muttering to herself, "When will father come back? Mother said he would definitely come back, but year after year, he still hasn't shown up. This year, he probably won't come either." Meg asked Amy to stand up straight in front of him. He looked at her with a serious expression and said, "Amy, from tomorrow onwards, you will officially go to Master Crass's place for lessons. Remember, during lessons, you are not allowed to call him Master Halfbeard. You must call him Master Crassus. This is the most basic respect a student and disciple should have for a teacher, understand? But he's Master Halfbeard. I like that title." Amy looked at Meg with a conflicted expression. "Amy, everyone has their own preferences, but we can't just do things according to our own preferences, because it may hurt others. Words are sometimes a sharp weapon, and hurting people's hearts is sharper than a knife." Meg shook his head. His expression was still serious as he continued, "As a student, you should always respect your teachers. Master Crassus and Master Julian may only have you as their disciple in their entire lives, so during lessons, you must listen to them obediently and respect them, understand?" "Yes, I understand." Amy looked into Meg's eyes and nodded obediently. After thinking for a while, her eyes lit up and she said, "Then can I call them Master Halfbeard and Master Turtleshell when I don't have lessons?" "You can call them whatever you like when we don't have lessons." Meg opened his mouth and looked at the expectant Amy. Anyway, Crassus and Julian didn't seem to dislike it, so he smiled and nodded. "Okay." Amy nodded happily. She looked out the window and held Meg's hand with her little hand. "Father, come with me to look at the stars. You haven't looked at the stars with me in a long time." "Okay, let's go to the balcony. It's closer to the stars." Meg looked at Amy and nodded. Speaking of which, ever since the restaurant opened, he had been busy with the restaurant's matters. Every day, he would wake up before Amy woke up, and after he was done, Amy would lie on the counter and fall asleep. He rarely had time to accompany her, so he couldn't help but feel guilty. Holding Amy's hand, Meg looked at Yaba Mia and said, "Mia, you should go back early. Be careful on the road, and don't come too early tomorrow morning. I have to take Amy to school. I'll be back at 6:50. Calm, of course. Be careful on the road. Don't come early tomorrow morning. Calms of your of he's. Calm, s. Amy of Amy's of her of course. Be careful on the road, big sister Mia. Bye." Amy waved at Mia. Meow, Ugly Duckling also meowed symbolically. After interacting with Amy for the past few days, Ugly Duckling's attitude toward Yaba Mia was still a little hostile. However, Amy's threat had mostly dissipated, but it still couldn't get close to her. Bye. Yaba Mia nodded with a smile. Looking at Meg, Amy, and the lazy Ugly Duckling, her heart was filled with warmth. "Father, can we bring the mushroom fairy with us?" Amy looked back at the music box on the counter when they reached the top of the stairs. She then looked up at Meg. "Of course." Meg took the music box with a smile before leading Amy upstairs. When the system was renovating the restaurant, Meg had convinced it to renovate the second floor as well. There was a small empty room and a large balcony on the third floor. The balcony was surrounded by a white ceramic railing, and the floor was covered with gray non-slip tiles. The balcony faced the Aden Square, and there was nothing to see. Aside from the balcony, everything else was perfect. "Wow! The roof of our house has become so awesome, it's actually flat." The door opened, and a light came on. Amy jumped out and looked at the empty balcony with elation. She put Ugly Duckling on the ground, and it ran around the balcony with her. It also seemed to be very happy. "This is such a great place. If we have more people in the future, we can barbecue, eat skewers, and drink beer on the balcony. With a balcony like this and a sky full of stars, we'll be even happier than gods." Meg was also pleasantly surprised. There was nothing in the back room. Normally, There would be some barbecue grills, umbrellas, reclining chairs, and so on. System, I need a reclining chair. Meg said in his heart. Of course he needed a comfortable reclining chair for stargazing. Lying on the ground was a little too shabby. Meg was a fan of enjoyment. The system's serious voice sounded in an implacable manner. A reminder to the host. According to the system's judgment, reclining chairs will change the layout of the restaurant to a certain extent, so the system will not provide reclining chairs. Please upgrade the restaurant to level 2 as soon as possible. When the time comes, the upgrade gift package will include 2 high-class reclining chairs. System, let me ask you a question. Will customers come to the balcony? Meg asked calmly. The system was silent for a moment before replying, probably not. Wrong. No, probably not, definitely not. I won't allow any customers to enter the area beyond the first floor, including Mia. Hence, the area above the second floor is the living area, not the restaurant. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he said, so, putting a reclining chair on the balcony has nothing to do with the layout of the restaurant. Your judgment is completely wrong. Are you selling the reclining chair? In short, if you're not selling it, I'll buy it myself tomorrow. I can also customize it according to my size. It doesn't matter if the price is higher, as long as it's comfortable to sit on. Meg's lips curled up. His tone was somewhat indifferent. The system has to admit that there was a bug just now, causing a calculation error. Adding a reclining chair on the 3rd floor will not affect the layout of the restaurant. The system was silent for a moment, and with a tone of self-blame, it quickly changed its tone and said, the system can provide thousands of types of reclining chairs for the host to choose from. If you add money, you can upgrade the massage chair. It's tailor-made for the host and perfectly fits your curves. It's a must-have at home or traveling. Chapter 175. Meg chose a brown rattan recliner that cost 5 gold coins. It had curved metal legs, and looked quite comfortable. It wasn't expensive either. The gold coins have been automatically deducted, and the goods will be ready for delivery in 5 minutes. Would you like to specify a delivery address? The system's voice sounded. Just deliver it to the balcony. Let me know when it's almost here. Meg looked at Amy, who was squatting down beside Ugly Duckling, and smiled. It would be a pity to miss out on this opportunity to teach Amy a magic trick. In the early autumn night, the night breeze blew, bringing with it a refreshing coolness that made people feel particularly comfortable. Father, come over here. I want to compete with Ugly Duckling to see who can imitate a duck better. Can you be our judge? Amy waved at Meg. Imitate a duck. Meg was rendered speechless. What kind of trick was this? He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, Amy, Ugly Duckling might not be an ordinary duck. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling nodded in agreement. Yes, I know it's not an ordinary duck. Amy nodded. She looked at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression, and said, You're an extremely ugly duckling. Meow, Ugly Duckling let out an aggrieved cry with a resigned expression. Meg shook his head with a smile. Amy was too obsessed with Ugly Duckling, and it looked like he wouldn't be able to change her mind in a short time. Instead, he asked, Then why are you competing? How do you plan to compete? I think even though Ugly Duckling is ugly, as a duckling, it won't be able to communicate with other ducks if it doesn't know how to croak. Therefore, I plan to teach it how to croak. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a resigned expression. She raised Ugly Duckling's chin with her little finger, and earnestly said, Ugly Duckling, learn from me. If you can't learn, you won't be able to eat tomorrow. Meow. Ugly Duckling immediately perked up upon hearing that, and it looked up at Amy with an earnest expression. Caw caw caw. Amy opened her mouth and called out. She really did look like that. Meow, meow, meow. Ugly Duckling also opened its mouth. No, it's quack, not meow, meow, meow. Amy stomped her foot and corrected it with a serious expression. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling immediately lost its confidence. No, it's quack. You're so stupid. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling, if you keep doing this, I'm going to set you on fire. Quack. Quack. Meow, 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 quack. Well, you'd better be alone in the future. No other duckling will be your friend. Amy, Amy's, and Amy, and Duckling, ugly, she, I. It's like this. I don't feel at ease letting it fly away. Why don't? Let's take care of it for now. Meg looked at Amy, who was gulping as she spoke. He knew what she was going to say, and he patted her head with a smile. The competition ended before it even began, and Ugly Duckling was completely defeated. The recliner has been completed, and it can be delivered at any time. Would you like to pick it up now? The system's voice suddenly sounded. Pick it up in 30 seconds. It's right here. Meg pointed to the side with his right hand, and then turned to Amy with a smile as he said, Amy, do you want Daddy to show you a magic trick? Magic trick? Not magic. Amy's eyes lit up, and she asked with a perplexed expression. Yes. It's something similar to magic. It's equally amazing. Meg nodded. Okay. Amy wants to see it. Amy clapped her little hands, and looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. If we want to look at the stars, then we have to have a chair, right? It's best if we can lie down comfortably, Meg said with a smile. Yes. Amy nodded. Look here, and don't blink. Meg pointed to the empty space on his right, and waved his hands in front of him. He counted to 30 in his heart, and shouted, change. Amy looked with wide eyes, but 3 seconds passed, and there was still nothing there. Meg's hand was still in midair, and he looked at the empty space in front of him with an awkward expression. What the fuck is going on? It didn't change. Meow. Ugly Duckling called out from behind him. Amy looked in the direction of the sound, and her eyes lit up. She exclaimed, Father, you really made a chair. It's right behind you. Meg turned around, and there was indeed a large brown recliner behind him. It had round legs, and the chair was still swaying slightly. Ugly Duckling was clawing at the legs of the chair, trying to climb onto it. Sorry, because the item was too big, the positioning was off by 1 meter. Next time, we'll bring you a more accurate service. The system's voice sounded in the standard customer service tone. Although he was cursing in his heart, he still had to smile. Meg felt that the system had definitely done this on purpose. After all, clothes could be directly placed on the wardrobe, but now it was a meter off when it was placed on the ground. It seemed that the system was starting to retaliate. Yes, actually, I did it on purpose. Meg nodded with a smile. He was going to show off, and he had to keep up the pretense even if he had to kneel. He reached out to push the recliner, and it immediately swayed back and forth evenly. It seemed that the balance was quite good. Ugly Duckling, which was climbing up the chair legs, was sent flying. It rolled twice before stopping. It looked around with a confused expression, as if it didn't know what had happened. Wow, Father is so awesome. When Amy learns magic, I want to be as awesome as Father. Amy looked up at Meg with admiration on her little face. Amy will be even more awesome than Father. Meg stroked Amy's hair with a smile. He could feel the admiration in Amy's eyes, and he was extremely satisfied. As expected, his daughter was the most sensible. Come on, let's look at the stars. Meg lay down on the recliner, leaving a small space beside him for Amy to lie down. Okay. Amy nodded her little head, and climbed up with some difficulty on her short legs. She threw herself into Meg's arms and giggled. Look, the stars are so beautiful today. Meg held Amy gently in his arms, and the recliner rocked slightly as he pointed at the starry sky with a smile. There wasn't a single cloud in the sky, and there weren't any of the dazzling neon lights in the city. The dark blue starry sky was especially deep, and the stars that dotted it were even more dazzling. Meg hadn't seen such a beautiful starry sky in many years. Chapter 176. Meg's eyes widened as he looked down at Amy, who was calling him Daddy in her baby voice. He suddenly remembered that the song "Where Are We Going, Daddy?" was in the music box. He thought for a moment before replying, I don't know. Then I'll teach you. Sure. Twinkle, 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 little stars all over the sky. You're out of tune, Meg replied with a smile. Father, didn't you say you didn't know how to sing? Amy immediately sat up and looked at Meg in confusion. Meg looked at Amy's serious expression, and suddenly felt a little depressed. His daughter really didn't play by the rules. Then let's sing together. A smile quickly appeared on Amy's face again, and she clapped her little hands as she sang, Twinkle, twinkle, little stars all over the sky. Amy's two little braids swayed from side to side, and her little face was full of smiles. Her little pointy ears were sparkling under the moonlight and starlight, and she looked extremely adorable. Meg was also smiling as he softly sang along to the beat. His baby voice drifted over the balcony all the way to the sky, and it seemed to make the starry sky even more dazzling. Ugly Duckling tried a few times to climb onto the smooth steel legs of the chair, but it was unable to do so. It could only run around anxiously under the chair, calling out from time to time in an attempt to make its presence known so that someone would remember to pick it up. Hey, Father, look! That star is flying. Amy suddenly stopped singing as she pointed at the starry sky in surprise. It's a shooting star. It said that if you make a wish to a shooting star, your wish will come true. Amy, do you want to make a wish? Meg looked in the direction that Amy was pointing at, and saw a bright star dragging a long tail behind it as it slowly glided across the sky toward the east. Really? Amy immediately closed her eyes, clenched her hands into fists, and placed them in front of her. She closed her eyes and made a wish seriously. I hope that Amy can grow up happily every day, Meg said as she looked at the sincere expression on her face. She closed her eyes and made a wish. After a while, Amy slowly opened her eyes, which were full of hope. What did Amy wish for? Meg looked at Amy and asked with a smile. Amy shook her head and said seriously, Teacher Luna said that we can't tell others about our wishes. If we do, it won't come true, so I can't tell Father. Well, then let's not talk about it. Xiang Liuxing's wish will definitely come true. Meg nodded. He was very grateful to Luna. She had played an important role in Amy's education. Over the past 2 years, she had molded Amy's worldview, allowing her to grow up in poverty but still be a kind child. Yes, Amy also believes that it will. Amy nodded. She suddenly pounced over and kissed Meg's cheek. Then, she leaned against his chest and whispered, Father, you will always be by Amy's side, right? Of course, I will always be by your side. No one can take me away from you. Meg gently stroked Amy's hair. A promise was also a responsibility. Father, you're so nice. Amy smiled and sat up again. Father, then I'll dance for you. I'll dance the Mushroom Fairy's dance. Okay. Meg nodded. Amy had only learned a little in the morning and afternoon, and now she was eager to perform for him. But father, what's the name of this dance? Why can't I understand what she's singing? Amy jumped off the chair and took the music box from the side. She looked at Meg curiously and asked. This. Meg pondered for a while. Of course, Amy couldn't understand Japanese. Even he couldn't understand it. As for the name of the song, it wasn't easy for children to understand. After thinking for a while, he nodded seriously and said, "This dance is called Spring is Here." Spring is here. Amy's eyes lit up. She clapped her hands and said, "It's great that spring is here. No wonder the Mushroom Fairy is dancing so happily." Yes, spring is great. Meg also nodded with a smile. Then I'll start. Amy squatted on the floor and tapped the screen lightly. The music of Gokuraku Jodo started playing. In just one day, Amy had completely mastered the touch screen of the music box. Although she couldn't read, she could easily play the song and dance by reading the pictures. As soon as the music started playing, Amy's face turned serious. She turned sideways and placed her hands in front of her chest. As the music played, she raised her left hand backward like scattering flowers. Then she turned 360 degrees back to her chest. Then she put one hand up and the other hand down to the left. When the drum beat sounded, she immediately turned to the right and then back again. With a neat turn behind her back, she crossed her legs, kicked the ground with one foot, and spun around. Her series of movements were all in sync with the rhythm. If these movements were done by Yabamiya, it would be considered a less standard version of Gokuraku Jodo. But when it was done by Amy, Meg couldn't stop smiling as he looked at Amy, who was trying her best to mimic the movements of the Mushroom Fairy with her short hands. She almost tripped over herself as she danced with her short legs. She clapped her hands and twisted her waist, and her whole body swayed as she danced. This dance was completely out of character. Meg's heart melted at the sight of those short legs and arms swinging around. Although the movements weren't standard, and they couldn't keep up with the rhythm at all, and were basically just paddling around, how could there be such an adorable dance in this world? How could there be such an adorable little fellow? Ugly Duckling was also bouncing along beside her. It was so happy that it also wanted to dance. It didn't look like a cat at all. The passionate music stopped, and Amy was still in her final pose. She was panting slightly as she looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. "Father. Master, did I dance well?" "Yes, very well. It's even more adorable and beautiful than the Mushroom Fairy." Meg nodded from the bottom of his heart. This was the first day of learning Gokuraku Jodo, and even though Amy had never danced before, she was able to memorize the movements of the entire dance. Her talent in dancing was already very astonishing to Meg. It probably wouldn't take long for Amy to completely master this dance. "I'll work even harder." Amy nodded with an earnest expression. She couldn't hide the elation on her little face. "Then let's go downstairs and wash up. Tomorrow is Amy's first day of school. I'll give Amy a bath, and then you can put on your new clothes for class tomorrow." Meg stood up and picked Amy up with a smile. "All right." Amy nodded happily. She threw her arms around Amy's neck and let Meg carry her downstairs. Ugly Duckling looked at the two of them with an aggrieved expression before leaving on its own. In the second prince's manor of Rodu, there was a handsome young man in a large hall. He was chatting with a few young magic casters in magician robes. His voice was warm and gentle, and the way he spoke was quite extraordinary. All of the magic casters were listening to him with expressions of admiration on their faces. At this moment, a middle-aged man who looked like a butler suddenly rushed in from the outside. He didn't care that there were so many people in the arena and directly walked to the side of the young man. He whispered in his ear, "Your Highness, someone is coming from that side." I finally finished it before midnight. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation votes, begging for subscriptions. All of a sudden, I feel confident. Chapter 177. Josh Edward raised an eyebrow upon hearing this, but he quickly regained his composure. He raised a hand to dismiss the butler, and rose to his feet with a smile. He turned to the dozen or so young magic casters, and said, "All of you are the cream of the crop among the younger generation of our Magus Tower. In a few years, you'll all be the pillars of the Empire, and the future masters of the Magus Tower. The future of the Empire requires your protection. Cheers! To the Empire!" All of the magic casters also rose to their feet with confident smiles on their faces. They were all looking at Josh with a hint of fanaticism in their eyes, and all of them downed their wine in one gulp. "It's already a little late, so I've booked a few rooms for all of you in the Aroma Pavilion. I'm sure all of you will have a good night's sleep tonight," Josh said to everyone with a smile. "Thank you, Your Highness. We're in for a treat, Your Highness. Your Highness is an all-rounder in both the pen and the sword. It would be a blessing for our Roth Empire if you were to ascend to the throne in the future." All of the magic casters' eyes lit up upon hearing this, and they all began to shower him with compliments. "I'm just the second prince. I wouldn't dare to say that I'm going to ascend to the throne." Josh waved his hand with a smile, and continued, "Go on. Don't keep the ladies waiting for too long." Josh's smile faded at the sight of all of the magic casters departing, and a hint of disdain and disgust appeared in his eyes. "Your Highness, the elven guests are waiting in the guest hall," the butler from before said respectfully with his head lowered. "Tell him to go to the study, and don't let anyone near the study," Josh said coldly. He tossed his wine cup onto the table, and half of the wine spilled onto the table as he made his way out. "Yes." The housekeeper lowered his head even more. Everyone on the street praised him. No one knew better than him what kind of person the gentle second prince was. The doors and windows of the study were tightly shut, and it was completely silent. A tall middle-aged elf looked at the second prince, who was wearing a purple robe and had his back to him as he stared at a painting on the wall. A drop of cold sweat slowly slid down his forehead, and the dim yellow light shone on his face through the white gauze lampshade, making him look a little nervous. This second prince, who was only in his early 30s, gave off an aura that was no less intimidating than Mistress Helena's. He had been standing here for over 10 minutes, but the second prince hadn't even taken a single glance at him, as if he were treating him like air. "Tell me, what message did Helena ask you to bring me this time?" Josh still didn't turn around. Instead, he turned his gaze to the next image, and asked in a cold voice. "Lady Helena asked me to bring you a letter," the elf hurriedly said. He took out a dark green letter from his bosom. A slender vine stretched out from the letter and crawled all over the envelope. It was like a seal. There was not a single word on the envelope. It looked quite mysterious. "Leave it on the table and leave," Joshua said without turning around. "Yes." The elf hurriedly nodded. He held the envelope with both hands and gently placed it on the table. He then took 2 steps back before leaving the room. He then gently closed the door behind him, and only then did he heave a long sigh of relief. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and his back was already drenched in sweat. Only after hearing the door close did Josh slowly turn around. He made his way over to the table and picked up the letter. The vine on the surface of the envelope lit up with a hint of green light before quickly withdrawing back into the envelope. Josh casually tore open the envelope and tipped it over the table. A small black seed and a piece of light green paper fell out. Josh ignored the small seed and picked up the letter. His brows gradually furrowed as he read through it. The room fell silent, and the light flickered slightly. After a long while, Joshua shifted his gaze away from the letter. The light green letter burned in his hand and was reduced to ashes. A ball of green flames also rose up from the envelope and the seed on the table, and they were completely reduced to ashes. Looks like I underestimated Snare. I didn't think that someone would be able to cast such a powerful spell. Alex, you really didn't die. Josh slowly clenched his fists. His voice was as cold as ice, and his expression was a little sinister. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the room, sweeping up the stack of white papers on the table. The paper fluttered wildly around the room, and the light from the lamp was sliced into shreds, illuminating Josh's dark expression. Josh suddenly reached out and grabbed a piece of paper. The gust of wind abruptly subsided, and all of the paper fluttering in the air fell to the ground as if it had been crushed by a rock. Looks like I'll have to move forward with my plan. Josh's expression had already returned to normal, and there was no hint of emotion on his handsome face. He sat down in front of his desk, picked up the quill on the table, and began to write on a piece of paper. Dear Irina, I haven't written to you in a long time. After writing that letter, he pulled out a blue envelope from the bookshelf beside him, and sealed it before writing on the envelope, to Irina. After a moment of contemplation, he pulled out a new piece of paper, and wrote, Mistress Helena, I'm willing to help you complete your plan, but I also hope that you'll remember your promise. The light of the Magus Tower shines upon the entire continent. On the southwestern border of the Roth Empire, there was a brightly lit military tent. A burly young man in a suit of golden armor was sitting at the head of the table. He raised a large bowl in front of him, and smiled as he said, Bottoms up. Bottoms up. A series of armored generals also raised their bowls with smiles on their faces, and downed the large bowl of wine in one gulp. As expected of the first prince. Old Jiang, who was seated below him, smiled as he looked at the young man in golden armor with approval in his eyes. Right at this moment, a guard hurried in, and whispered into the young man's ear, Your Highness, Quine is back. He says he has something to report. Sean Edwards' eyes lit up before calming down. He nodded, and gestured for the guard to leave. He rose to his feet with a smile, and said, Please continue to drink, everyone. I'm going to the outhouse, and I'll be back soon. He then got up and walked out of the tent. Tell him to come to my tent. Sean's smile disappeared as soon as he exited the tent, and he calmly issued an instruction before making his way to a nearby tent. Your Highness, after more than half a year of investigation, I've found that General Simon, who has already returned to Rodu, is the most suspicious of all the generals that you asked me to investigate. When that incident occurred, he disappeared for a period of time for some reason. Although there was an explanation for his disappearance later, it was different from what he said. Soon, a young man in a tight black suit and a silver half-mask appeared in the tent. He looked around, and his voice was a little hoarse. Chapter 178. After bathing Amy and Ugly Duckling, he told Ugly Duckling a bedtime story, and only then did Ugly Duckling fall asleep. Meg leaned over and kissed Amy's hair on her forehead. She was sleeping soundly with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and a smile appeared on his face. As expected, playing with Amy like this was the most enjoyable thing to do. It's the first day of class tomorrow, and it's magic class, so I should wear a magician's robe. Meg turned off the lights and lay down on the bed. Tomorrow was Amy's first day of class, and he was inexplicably excited and nervous. Meg naturally wanted Amy to be by his side all the time, but children still needed to learn and grow. Just as Crassus had said, only by mastering one's power could one protect oneself and the people one wanted to protect. He hoped that Amy would one day have the power to protect herself, because he was going to grow old eventually. System, I want a custom-made magician's robe, Meg said directly. Host, can you not make it sound so natural? I'm the god of cookery cultivation system, so please don't use me as a treasure chest. The system was a little annoyed. You make it sound like you're not selling it. Meg pursed his lips, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he smiled and said, System, this is Amy's first time going to school, so I want something that's low-key but looks extraordinary. It's not blinding, but it's also something that makes people's eyes stay on it unconsciously. It's a close-fitting and loose-fitting magician's robe. See if you have any suitable designs, and we can negotiate the price. The system fell into deep silence. After a long while, it roared, Why don't you ask for something that looks more square and round? What if it's bigger and looks smaller? I'll give you the pen. You design it. I don't want the money. Isn't that a bit too much? Meg raised an eyebrow. It was rare to see a system that didn't even want money. He thought for a moment and said, All right, then just give me the design, and I'll choose it myself. The system did not say a word, but the speed at which it sent the pictures was not slow at all. The picture flashed, and Meg's mind was filled with many pictures of the little magician's robe. There were all kinds of strange mage robes. There were long mage robes like Crassus and Julian's, which covered their entire body. There were also short mage robes with separate top and bottom, which were more suited for mobile combat. Of course, there were also mage robes that were pink, blue, and white. They looked quite cute. But system, why did you put this Daoist robe and kasaya in here? What kind of sorcerer would dress like that? When the picture moved to the middle, Meg looked at the 2 rows of bright yellow Daoist robes and kasayas and couldn't help but complain. From a certain perspective, the truly powerful Daoist priests and monks are also considered magicians. The system muttered. Do they know how to make fireballs? Meg asked seriously. Then, the 2 rows of pictures silently disappeared. Meg looked at each of the pictures carefully, and finally chose a slim-fit purplish-blue magic dress with black stockings, black boots, and a big hat with a black cloak on the outside. This combination should be very cute, right? Although the total cost was close to 30 copper coins, Meg still bought it without batting an eye. Moreover, he bought 2 sets in one go. The other set was completely black, in the dark Lolita style. He let Amy wear it as her school uniform. Debit successful. Ordering in progress. All will be delivered in 5 minutes. The system's cheerful voice sounded, and there was no trace of unhappiness. Put it in the wardrobe. System, if there are any more mistakes this time, I will never buy anything from you again. Meg warned sternly, and muttered, Stupid logistics. The system automatically ignored Meg's muttering and said with a good service attitude, Host, please rest assured. It will be delivered automatically in 5 minutes. Delivery address, host's wardrobe. Meg set the alarm for 5 o'clock. He sat up and saw that Amy didn't kick off the blanket, so he reached out to turn off the bedside lamp and went to sleep. Father, get up quickly. I'm going to be late for school. The next morning, before the alarm went off, Meg was woken up by Amy. He opened his eyes in a daze. Amy had climbed onto his bed without him noticing. She jumped and shouted happily, School! School! Amy is going to school. Meow, meow, ugly duckling cried under the bed. It was lying on the edge of the bed, trying to climb up, but it was most likely kicked off the bed by Amy. She stomped her little foot on Mag's hand. Mag, who was still a little groggy, opened his eyes wide and woke up instantly. He retracted his hand silently. It wasn't painful, but it was a little numb. It's still early. Amy, don't you want to sleep a little longer? Meg turned to look at the alarm clock. It was only 4:50. He looked at Amy, who was jumping excitedly on the bed, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, it was her first day at school, after all, so he could understand her excitement. Her enthusiasm for learning was a little beyond his expectations. "No, father. Let's get up early. I want to wear a beautiful dress and tie up my hair." Amy shook her head. Her little face was flushed, and she didn't feel sleepy at all. She looked at Meg curiously, and asked, "Oh, right. Father, where are we going for class today?" "We're going to Master Crass's class today. It's in Chaos School," Meg said with a smile. He also lifted the blanket and prepared to get out of bed. Chaos School. Amy's mouth was wide open with surprise. "Yes, we're going to the Magic Academy." Meg patted her head and walked to the wardrobe. "That's great. Then I can go and play with Daphne." Amy jumped up happily, and the bed shook. Ugly Duckling, which had crawled to the bed with great difficulty, yelped, and was shaken off the bed again. It lay on its back on the ground with its head tilted to the side and its little tongue out, looking as if it had nothing to live for. If you can make it in time after class, you can go and play with other children." Meg nodded with a smile. He opened the wardrobe and turned to Amy with a mysterious smile, and said, "Guess what father got you for school today?" "A beautiful dress." Amy looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. "It's a beautiful magician's robe." Meg smiled as he pulled out the dress and a red and black cloak from the wardrobe. "Wow, what a beautiful dress, and what a great cloak." Amy walked over to the bed with stars in her eyes. She opened her little hands and said, "Father, I want to try it on." "Okay." Meg nodded with a smile, and helped Amy put it on. The material of the dress and the cloak was very comfortable to touch. According to the system, it added some fireproof material to it without affecting the texture of the clothes. Of course, it couldn't guarantee that it would be able to withstand Amy's small fireballs. She was wearing a bluish-purple dress with lace around her wrists and hem. She was wearing black stockings and black leather boots. She was wearing a red and black cloak that was tied tightly and hung down to her calves. Then, a cute little magician appeared. "I was delayed by something during the day, and now I'm very sleepy, so I don't want to force myself to write. I promise I'll send it to you tomorrow. My apologies. Also, the editor told me today that the copyright of this book might be promoted. In other words, if the results are good, maybe everyone will have a chance to see the manga version, the anime version, and even the movie version of the restaurant." Qingyu was pleasantly surprised, but also a little conflicted. The current results might not be good enough, and people might not be interested in it. Among them, the subscription data was the most important. It was the difference between life and death. So, Qingyu would like to appeal to all the readers to download a Chidian reading app and support a full subscription. Maybe you will be able to see the animated version of Amy in the near future. Chapter 179. Meg took 2 steps back and looked at Amy, who had changed into a full set of magician robes. He nodded with satisfaction. She was wearing a little bluish-purple dress and a black cloak, which made her look cute and a little domineering. She looked so cute with black stockings and black leather boots. Sure enough, he had a talent for matching clothes. "Father, do I look good?" Amy asked expectantly, looking at Meg. "Of course. Very good." Meg nodded seriously. Amy is a little magician now. Amy stuck her little fists out from under the cloak and ran around the room happily. Ugly Duckling had gotten up at some point and was running behind her. If she learns melee magic from Crassus, she'll probably become a little Superman. Meg looked at Amy's fluttering cloak, and the smile on his face grew wider. Amy ran to the next room and looked at herself in the full-length mirror for a long time. Then she looked back at Meg and said, "Father, I want to tie two tails today. No need to tie my hair into pigtails." "Okay." Meg nodded. This was the first time that Amy had taken the initiative to change her hairstyle. It seemed that she was in a good mood for class today. He took a comb from the side and tied Amy's hair into two pigtails. The two little silver tails swayed up and down, which indeed looked more suitable for a magician robe than pigtails. After washing up, Meg went downstairs to prepare the ingredients. Amy and Ugly Duckling were playing in the dining room. Although they had woken up early, the little one didn't look sleepy at all. The little witch and her cat. Meg calculated the time as he kneaded the dough. Because he had to send Amy to school at 6:30, he had to shorten the time to prepare the ingredients this morning. The tofu pudding could be made in one go. The most time-consuming thing was the ruggiamo. He could only reduce the amount of ruggiamo in the morning. How to shorten the time was a problem. "System, I want to buy a car," Meg suddenly said. This was probably the best way to shorten the school time. "You can't afford it," the system said quietly. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect to be despised so early in the morning. "Second-hand alto." Meg tried again. "The system doesn't provide second-hand goods," the system said proudly. After a pause, it added, "And in this world, second-hand alto can fall apart at any time. For the sake of the host's safety, I don't recommend it." Meg thought about it for a moment, and felt that the system's words were quite reasonable. The streets in Chaos City were quite flat, but the roads paved with stones definitely wouldn't be as flat as the roads. He thought about it for a moment before asking, "How much is the cheapest off-road vehicle you have?" Range Rover, 15,000 gold coins. Multiple packages can be upgraded, and the top package only costs 30,000 gold coins. The system's voice sounded like a professional shopping guide. "Well, let's take a look at the bicycle," Meg said with a smile. Meg had saved so much to buy a 10,000 gold strength point set. How could he bear to spend 15,000 gold on a car? Also, the system was too greedy. It knew that buying a car was a one-time deal, and that he wouldn't be able to change it for at least a few years. The first thing he bought was a Range Rover. Although he had a top-class car in his garage in his previous life, and it was the cheapest car in his garage, he had spent the money earned by others. Now that he was making money himself, he realized how hard it was to make money. Of course, he had to be frugal with the money he earned from selling ruggiamos. For the top-class Range Rover, the system provides down payment service. It's interest-free for 12 months. The down payment is as low as 9,000 gold coins. If you buy now, you can get 3 free maintenance sessions. Maintenance fees below 10 gold coins will be waived. Don't miss this opportunity. If you want to buy now, buy now. The system's persuasive advertising slogan sounded. "No. Go away. Look at the bike," Meg said without hesitation. The system was so shameless in order to make money. "You can test drive it for free," the system tempted again. "Bike." Meg was unmoved. If he got addicted and couldn't help but buy it, it would be bad. Also, there was no gasoline in this world. If the system monopolized it, he would be at his mercy. Meg didn't want to be too high profile. If he drove such a steel monster on the streets of this world, he would probably be surrounded as soon as he went out. Before he had enough strength, keeping a low profile was the best way to make a fortune. Seeing that the promotion was hopeless, the system had no choice but to drag out the list of bicycles for Meg. Meg quickly chose a Forever brand old elevated bicycle. He then tricked the system into using carbon fiber, modifying the frame with a full shock absorber, a drive-by-wire front fork, a 12-speed transmission system, and a removable child seat at the back. All in all, it only cost him 10 gold coins. The bicycle is being customized. It will arrive in 5 minutes. Host, please specify the location. The system's voice sounded. The address is at the entrance of the restaurant. But I have to delay the delivery. I'll deliver it when I leave. It would be embarrassing if it was stolen. Meg looked at the concept design given by the system. Although the design looked a little old, it looked quite domineering after all the modifications. There was a black basket at the front, and a black child's seat at the back. The style was also very simple. Meg felt like he had bought something worth more than 10,000 yuan with 1,000 yuan. He was very satisfied. After breakfast, Meg bought a small thermos with 1 gold coin. He filled it with sweet tofu pudding and Yangzhou fried rice. Then, he went out with Amy. Ding! Your package has been delivered. Please check it. The system said. Father, will we be late for class now? Amy looked up at Meg, who was locking the door, and asked worriedly. Ugly Duckling was looking around excitedly in her arms. It was very interested in the things outside. Don't worry. We have a bicycle. It'll take less than 10 minutes to get to Chaos School. Meg shook his head with a smile. He pointed at the black bicycle parked at the entrance. It had a streamlined carbon fiber body. Although it had a basket and a child's seat, it was still very domineering. Wow, what is this? It has 2 wheels. Is it a carriage? But we don't have a horse. Amy asked curiously as she turned to look at the bicycle. This is a bicycle. It doesn't need a horse to move. Meg shook his head with a smile. He hung the thermos flask and the box in a bag on the handle. Then, he took Ugly Duckling from Amy and put it in the basket. He carried Amy onto the bicycle, patted her head, and said seriously, "Hold on tight. We have 15 minutes to get to class. We need to hurry." Okay. Amy nodded obediently. Her eyes were full of anticipation. Although she didn't know what a bicycle was, if Father said it could move, then it could definitely move. Ugly Duckling clung to the edge of the basket and poked its little head out to look around curiously. It meowed twice. Meg flipped onto the bicycle. He stepped hard on the pedals, and the bicycle whizzed forward, going faster and faster. Wow! It's so fast. This is so fun. Amy raised her hands and yelled happily. Her little cape fluttered in the wind, making her look like a little Superman. Chapter 180. The little girl's bell-like laughter and the red and black magician's robe that fluttered in the wind attracted a lot of attention from passers-by. What's that thing? Is it a new spell? Maybe. It only has 2 small wheels, and it won't fall. And it's so fast. Hey, isn't that Mr. Mac and Little Boss? The passers-by began to discuss among themselves, and some of them even recognized Meg and Amy. Look, Father. There's a 2-wheeled car running on its own. A little boy yelled as he tugged at the arm of a man who was buying breakfast. What are you talking about so early in the morning? Here, take your favorite scallion pancake. The man patted the little boy's head with a smile before handing him the scallion pancake that was still a little hot. He looked up in disbelief, only to be stunned by what he saw. He blinked and looked again, only to see a man and a little girl in a magician's robe riding a 2-wheeled car quickly off into the distance. What's that? The man asked with a puzzled expression. Father, that's so cool. It's even faster than our carriage, the little boy said with an envious expression. Humph, that's nothing. Old Huang, drive the carriage and catch up to that person riding that strange thing. Prove that our carriage is faster. The man said to the skinny old man who was driving the carriage. He then led the little boy onto the carriage. "Yes, master," the coachman replied as he cracked the horses butt with his whip. The two-wheeled carriage immediately galloped forward, and the passers-by made way as they chased after Meg. Ugly Duckling rolled around in the basket. Every time it tried to get up, it would be jolted back into the basket. In the end, it chose to give up and lay on its back in the basket, looking up at the sky with a blank expression. "It's fun. The bicycle is so fun." Amy spread out her arms happily. She had never ridden in a carriage or a horse before, and this was the first time she had experienced something other than running. She was very excited. "Hold on tight." Meg's face was also full of smiles. The bicycle produced by the system was indeed excellent. Even with his current physical fitness, it was not strenuous to ride it. Moreover, he had been eating Yangzhou fried rice and Rujiamo every day, so his strength had increased. The streets of the Aden Square were paved with bluestones that were 20 centimeters wide and 40 centimeters long. Every piece fit perfectly without a single gap. It was said that the best craftsmen of the dwarf race had paved the road piece by piece. Every day, there would be people patrolling the road to replace the broken bluestones. It had been 100 years, and there was not much difference between a car on the road and a cement road. The fully shock-absorbing frame perfectly absorbed most of the shock. Okay. Amy reached out and grabbed the handle. She giggled and said, "Father, they all seem to be very envious of me." "No, she's envious of me. She's envious that I have such a cute baby," Meg said with a smile. "No. I'm just jealous that I have such a great father." Amy reached out and hugged Meg's waist, giggling. "Ha! He really caught up. Hurry up and run, we've already caught up with you." A two-wheeled carriage rushed up from the side. The curtain was pulled open, and a little boy with a bite of a small onion pancake stuck his head out. He was a little proud. "How can a two-wheeled carriage outrun my carriage?" "Young master, we're going to overtake them," the coachman said proudly. He was full of pride for his driving skills and the carriage. The man in the carriage also had a smile on his face. Although he only wanted to show off in front of his son, he was naturally in a good mood to be able to overtake others in the morning. However, old Huang's words were not very respectful. He saw that Meg and Amy's clothes were not very normal. Although Amy's magician's robe was a little out of place, it was not common to see such a young magic caster. Perhaps she was a little prodigy, so he decided to apologize and get to know her. "Father, that little kid seems to be provoking you." Amy looked back at the small onion pancake in the little boy's hand and swallowed her saliva. "Then I'll have to show him the true speed of a bicycle." Meg also turned to look at the smug smile on the coachman's face. His words were a little provocative, and his desire to win immediately flared up. On a street with pedestrians, he actually dared to provoke him, who was riding a modified bicycle that was close to a professional race car. It looked like a battle between a bicycle and an otherworldly carriage was inevitable. Meg looked at the coachman with a serious expression and said, "The final destination is the entrance of Chaos School. You'll see my carriage there. Of course, I'll have already sent the child in by then." "Father is so cool." Amy looked at Meg's profile and clapped her little hands. She turned to the coachman and encouraged, "You guys have to work hard too. Otherwise, Father might have already gone home. I swear on my 40 years of driving experience that there's no way you can beat me." The coachman glared at Meg. He didn't think that Meg would dare to provoke him. These two horses were Vic horses in the prime of their lives. They were very gentle and hardy, and were one of the best horses for pulling carriages. The goblins used them to haul ores, and only a limited number of them were sold to the public each year. It was only because of his master's status that he was able to buy a few of them. When they really were running, they were even faster than many horses that didn't pull carriages. This guy is quite interesting. Dicus was about to say something, but a smile appeared on his face. As a mid-level official in the city lord's castle, he naturally wasn't going to antagonize Meg over something like this. However, he had asked someone to buy these Vic horses, and just a few days ago, he had used one of them to beat a friend's very proud steed. Now that he heard Meg say this, Dicus didn't mind old Huang competing with him. He wanted to see if this two-wheeled thing was really as powerful as he said it was. Meg withdrew his gaze, and his expression became serious. There were a few crisp sounds of gears being adjusted, and the bicycle, which was already half a body behind the carriage, immediately rushed forward. It sped along the street that wasn't very crowded in the morning, and it became faster and faster. It was like a gust of wind as it whizzed past the pedestrians. In the blink of an eye, it was 100 meters away, and it was getting further and further away. How? How is this possible? Old Huang, who was about to raise his whip, stared dumbfounded at the bicycle that was about to disappear from his sight. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Old Huang! Old Huang, you can do it! The little boy shouted excitedly. He patted the wall of the carriage with his little hand and looked at the bicycle in the distance with an anxious expression.